individuality. So, so if I come in with a metal head next time, you know,
What does the metalhead have to do with anything?
All right. Welcome, Taisha. Welcome.
Welcome. I just want to co-sign Mark's comments that everything isn't all sunshine and strawberry relates to AI. It has excited to navigate all that with you all. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Mr. Mayor.
You as well,
Hey
Taisha.
there, Alicia.
Okay, and with that, it is 6 p.m. and we're all present. So, Alicia, can we get the recording started, please?
Yes, sir. And channel 8 is ready.
Good. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 11th, 2024 meeting of the Boulder City Council, our first meeting of the new year. And we're going to start with an announcement. And that announcement is about the 2024 boards and commissions recruitment. So if you're looking for an opportunity to get involved, this is a great way to do it. The 2024 boards and commissions recruitment period is now open until January 29th, 2024. You can find the board and commission descriptions and vacancies online at bouldercolorado.gov/government/boards-and-commissions. And appointed members can now participate in person or virtually through hybrid meetings. And members also receive a free RTD EcoPass to enjoy unlimited rides on RTD trains and buses. So please contact the City Clerk's office for more information at City Clerk's office at bouldercolorado.gov or call 303-441-3008. And I will now call us to order and ask Alicia if we could do a roll call, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And good evening, everybody, and welcome back. We'll start tonight's roll call with Councilmember Adams.
Present.
Benjamin.
Present.
Mayor Brockett.
Present.
Councilmember Folkerts.
Present.
Marquis.
Present.
Shuhard.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Spear.
Present.
Councilmember Wallet.
I am here.
See. And Weiner.
Present.
Mayor, we have our quorum.
Thanks so much. And I would now request a motion to amend the agenda to add two things. Item 5C, which is an update on cold weather preparedness, and item 7A, the 2024 Library District Trustee Appointment Committee assignments.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that's unanimous. The agenda has been amended. And we will now move to our item 1A, the National Day of Racial Healing Declaration, to be presented by Councilmember Adams.
Thank you so much, Mayor Brockett. The City of Boulder is committed to advancing racial equity and acknowledges that we must all work earnestly to create courageous and supportive environments that acknowledges our tragic history, promotes healing of wounds created by racial, ethnic, and religious bias, and builds on equitable and just society so that people can thrive. As city leaders, it is our duty to protect the opportunity for people to learn, grow, and thrive in nourishing environments that do not violate safety, dignity, and humanity. Further, every person can exhibit an act of kindness or make a simple action that can have a profound effect on an entire society. Racism and race-based stress are unjust burdens that present physical and psychological barriers to the health and success of people of color. Racial healing is a vital and critical commitment to the education, social, mental, and overall well-being of all community members. If we all dedicate ourselves to the principles of truth, racial healing, relationship building, solidarity, transformative action, we can all bring about the necessary changes in thinking and behavior that will propel us propel our community and the nation forward as a united force where racial bias can be where racial biases can be recognized, and most importantly, unlearned. That was my add-in. My bad. I know I'm gonna get in trouble for it. We, the City Council of the City of Boulder, Colorado, join the nation in declaring January 16th, 2024 as National Day of Racial Healing and urge all our citizens to promote the truth, racial healing, and transformation in the ways that are best suited for them individually, to work together to raise our collective consciousness around the need to reconcile the unequitable pain caused by historical and current systems of oppression. Signed by our mayor, Aaron Brockett. Thank you so much.
So much for that powerful declaration, Alicia. All right, Alicia, can we go to our consent agenda, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Our consent agenda is item 2 on tonight's agenda, and it consists of items 2A through 2D.
Any questions, comments, or a motion?
I make a motion to pass the consent agenda.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. Do we need a roll call on this, Alicia?
No, sir. We can do a show of hands.
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. All right, that's unanimous. Very good. We do not have any public hearings this evening, so if we can go to our matters from the city manager now, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Our matters from the city manager are item 5 on tonight's agenda. 5A is the community survey results.
Thank you, Alicia. And I'll say that this was my first community survey in the city, so I was super excited to hear and to see what we would find out from our community. It's been a while since we've had one, since before the pandemic. So really excited that so many people responded. I'm going to send it over to Sarah Huntley, who will walk us through some sort of initial framing, but we have our lovely consultant, Jade, I see you, to really walk us through the results as they did the survey themselves. So Sarah, I pass on to you.
Thank you, Nuria. I appreciate it. Sarah Huntley, Director of Communications and Engagement. I'm happy to tee up the conversation tonight. We're very excited to have an opportunity to present to you. As you know, we've been working hard as a city together over the past few years to make engagement with our community more meaningful, more inclusive, and more transparent. A big part of engaging in the government context involves receiving feedback. And as council well knows, we're fortunate to be part of a passionate community, and we see lots of powerful examples of anecdotal, qualitative, and individual perspectives making a big difference in this very room, as a matter of fact. At the same time, we know that these individual testimonies don't always give us the full picture. We don't always hear from people who are unable to participate in our processes. And that's where efforts like our community survey, when they're done in a randomized, scientifically valid way, can really help us. It can give us a much better understanding of what the viewpoints are across our entire Boulder community. Since the late 1980s, the city has conducted a comprehensive and scientifically valid survey at fairly regular intervals. And the idea has been to measure community sentiment around core services, broader community goals and priorities, as well as governance. Starting in 2014, the city began adopting a more consistent approach or survey tool so that results could be compared over time. Prior to that, each time we did a community survey, a council committee and staff committee developed a brand new measurement tool. So in 2014, we started using a consistent tool. It was used every 2 years from 2014 through 2018. And then as Nuria mentioned, when we got to 2020, just right after the pandemic began taking hold, we made a decision to pause the community survey. The reason was twofold. One, we really knew that there were vulnerable populations that absolutely needed our undivided attention and resources, and we wanted to redirect critical funding to the then unfolding pandemic. But we also recognized even then that this worldwide crisis was likely to shift perception so much that trying to just compare results, pretending like nothing had happened differently in this moment, would be really challenging. But now here we are in this more of a I think what we might call a new normal. Certainly the COVID hasn't gone away, but we're in a new normal. And the city wanted to recommit at the end of 2023 to the survey process. This time around, we opted for a hybrid approach. We absolutely wanted to have some indicators that have been consistent compared to the 2018 survey. So working with Polco, which is the company we hired to assist us with this, we decided to keep nearly 80 indicators the same as 2018. And we're able to look over time how we're comparing to 5 years ago. But we also added brand new questions that reflect some of the emerging issues we're facing or prioritizing as a community. And this data, in some cases, is going to be starting point data that we can build on with the next several surveys. Tonight, you have an opportunity to hear directly from the consultant who conducted the survey on our behalf, Polco's Director of Survey Research and Boulder resident, Jade Arosha, is here to share information about the methodology and the results. Before I turn over to her, though, I just want to say I know there's going to be a natural tendency, because this is immediately what I wanted to do, which is to look at these data points and start talking about specific solutions to areas where we fell short. During our limited time together tonight, however, I'm going to encourage us to just sort of sit with the data a little bit, understand it, understand how it was collected, ask questions that you may have that help us understand what the feedback is trying to tell us. After our discussion, I'll wrap us up with more information about next steps, which are going to include opportunities for us to decide and talk and decide and explore together what we're going to do with this data. That includes specific actions we might want to take in operations on the sort of city manager side of the house, or policy making with council directives, or both. So we will definitely have these opportunities in the next month or two before the council retreat to understand and talk about what we might do with the feedback we're getting. The other thing I want to do before I turn over to Jade is to acknowledge that no survey tool is perfect. We've been on a journey in the city to better understand the benefits and disadvantages of quantitative methods of evaluating perspective, and we've learned a ton in the last few years. Especially in the context of our commitment to racial equity, we know that surveys can be fraught with bias. By hiring Polco for the survey and tapping into their expertise, and just generally in the work we've been doing inside the city on data collection, we know we need to prioritize best practices around equitable surveying. This includes disaggregating feedback by race, ethnicity, and other demographic characteristics. And it also means that we need to find ways to weight appropriately when we find ourselves with sample sizes, as we do in Boulder, where certain populations show up in much greater numbers. We're committed to this ongoing work. In fact, my department and the Department of Innovation and Technology have been talking about a potential pilot program around what some people call decolonization of data, so that we can make sure that we are keeping up with the trends that are emerging in this field, as well as the innovation areas to solve some of the problems we know exist. I'm confident that Jade can talk more about her organization's commitment to equitable surveying as well. With that, I'm going to turn over the floor to Polco. Hopefully you see the presentation on your screen.
Thanks so much, Sarah, for that thoughtful and detailed introduction. I believe that's the best intro I've ever received, and I've been doing this for a long time. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Jade Arosha, and I am the Director of Survey Research for Polco at National Research Center. And I'm very pleased to be here this evening to present the results of the 2023 community survey to you all. As Sarah mentioned, not only am I a Boulder resident, but NRC is also based here in Boulder, Colorado as well. And in fact, our founder, Tom Miller, got his start many, many years ago working for the city of Boulder. So definitely one of our longtime clients. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge and give thanks to our primary contact for this project, Chris Passarelli, who was very thoughtful and helpful throughout the survey development and implementation process. Because we have merged with companies since the last time you surveyed with us, I'm just going to pause here and explain a little bit about who we are versus who we were when you last surveyed with us. So National Research Center, we have been conducting national community surveys and resident surveys across the country for nearly 30 years. As I mentioned, we are based here in Boulder, Colorado, and we are exclusive partners with ICMA and NLC. Back in 2019, NRC merged with civic engagement platform Polko. And really what this does is allows our company to provide a better platform in which to engage with residents on an ongoing basis after your your traditional survey efforts, and also just in between traditional survey years, and also allows you to ask shorter form topical surveys as well, and to dig deeper into specific topics. The survey methodology for this year was similar to that given in previous years, so I will give a brief overview here. So this was Boulder's 11th iteration of the community survey. And Sarah mentioned this, but in previous years, the survey had changed significantly from year to year. And then for the last several years, Boulder conducted our templatized community survey, the National Community Survey. This year, Boulder elected to switch over to a customized survey format, which allowed for more customization of the survey instrument itself, and also for much more robust reporting. So that is new for the 2023 results. We conducted the survey this year from September 5th to October 17th, and we employed what we call the hybrid mailing approach, in which the total sample of 6,000 randomly selected households, 3,000 of those households received 2 postcard invitations 1 week apart, inviting them to take the survey online. And another 3,000 households received a postcard invitation followed by a paper survey packet 1 week later. The purpose of this hybrid approach is to determine the difference in response rates to the two different approaches, due to the fact that including a paper survey packet does significantly increase the costs of surveying. And so this is an attempt to gauge how successful in any given community an online only survey with mail invitations is. In Boulder, we actually saw very similar response rates to these two different approaches. The online survey was available in English, Spanish, and Nepali. On the survey packet itself, which was a 5-page survey packet, the cover letter, and postage paid return envelope, that was printed in English. However, all of the mailed materials contained instructions in all 3 of those languages, instructing them how to go online to take the survey in their language of preference. Out of those 6,000 total selected households, we received a total of 895 responses, for a 15% overall response rate and a plus or minus 3% margin of error. Industry standard for a survey such as this is 5% or less, so you can have extra confidence in the precision and the validity of your results. Further, about a few weeks after the scientific random sample survey opened, there was a community-wide open participation survey available to the community at large. This was an online only survey as well, and we received 324 responses to that survey. The survey results from the random sample survey and the open participation survey have been kept separate. This is a survey industry best practice in order to ensure that the data presented in the main body of the report are most representative of Boulder. However, we do include the open participation results in the report, and you can compare the results from the 2 different surveys. Finally, the results were statistically weighted. The results to both surveys, that random sample and the open participation, were statistically weighted in order to improve the representativeness of the results. I'll be referring throughout the rest of these slides to the benchmark comparisons. So here at POCO, we have a benchmark database that is a national database comprised of over 500 comparison communities. And further, because we are, again, based here in Boulder, we have a wealth of communities that we work with in the Denver, Boulder Metro Front Range area. And so we are also able to provide comparisons to a custom subset of communities from our database that's here in the Front Range. So throughout the rest of this presentation, I'll be referring to those benchmarks. Getting now into our overview of survey results. as I mentioned, those benchmarks. So we'll start with the national comparisons. There were 107 items on the survey for which we could provide comparisons to the national averages. Of those 107, 31 were considered higher, 64 were similar, and 12 were lower. The cutoff points for higher, similar, and lower are 10 points. So anything within 10 points of the average rating considered similar, and then more than 10 points higher or lower is considered higher or lower. We also further designate in the report, as you review the actual full report, much higher and much lower, and that is signified by a difference of at least 20 points. There were actually quite a few items in Boulder that were much higher than the national benchmarks, and some of these included Boulder as a place to visit, ease of travel by bicycle, and overall quality of natural environment, among others. I'll be speaking more about those shortly. When looking at the Front Range community comparisons, there were also 107 items for which we could provide comparisons. And in the Front Range, 37 ratings in Boulder were higher than the Front Range average, 64 were similar, and then 6 were lower. We also had a few items that were much higher than the Front Range comparisons. These included the vibrancy of the downtown commercial area, shopping opportunities, and bus or transit services, among others. Finally, because we have surveyed in many previous years, for the purposes of this presentation, I'll be referring, when I refer to trends, it's to the most recent survey year in 2018 versus the entire very long trend line that Boulder has. So compared to 2018 results in 2023, in order to be considered statistically different year over year, there is a 4% what we call margin of error, rule of thumb margin of error to consider the results. So if it's more than a 4% difference, you can consider it statistically different. So 21 items in 2023 were similar, 13 were higher, and then 44 were lower. And we'll be talking about these in more detail shortly. I do also want to note, although Sarah did mention this already, 2018 to 2023, that is a 5-year gap that is significantly longer than most of the communities that we work with. We recommend surveying every 2 to 3 years. So we are missing, and many other communities also chose to forego surveying during the height of the pandemic. So this is not unique to Boulder, but it is something to keep in mind as you review trends in particular, that is a particularly large gap in time. Wanted to focus on the 5 most positive, or I should say most notable increases in ratings over time. So these were ease of public parking, 22% increase in, over time, ease of travel by car, and then also stormwater management, traffic signal timing, and drinking water. But those increases of 22% and 21% respectively are very notable. Conversely, we also have our 5 largest downward trends over time. You can see these are fairly large decreases. So these include crime prevention, the cleanliness of Boulder, air quality, the availability of affordable quality mental health care, and then public places where people want to spend time. There's some fairly significant differences over time there. Moving now into the key findings, this is a broad overview of the survey results. There's a wealth of data in the full report. This is intended to be a high-level overview of the results that you'll find in the full report. So with that, our first key finding, quality of life is high in Boulder. About 85% of Boulder residents awarded excellent or good ratings to the quality of life in Boulder in 2023. And this rating was similar to the national and the Front Range benchmarks, but did decline from 2018 to 2023. Over to the right, we can see a few broad measures of quality of life here in the city. Here at the top, the star designations, there is a legend there at the bottom of this slide. The stars indicate comparisons to national and Front Range benchmark comparisons. Anything with that bolded line around it indicates a much higher designation. So here we have at the top, 91% positive, Boulder as a place to visit. And then in descending order, Boulder as a place to live, to work, as a place to raise children, to retire, and the sense of community in the city. All of those that don't have stars next to them, those were similar to both the national and the Front Range comparisons. We also asked about a number of broad community characteristics, and I did briefly mention these earlier, but for some of these. So at the top of the list, overall quality of natural environment in Boulder, much higher than both sets of benchmarks comparisons at 94% positive. Also overall health and wellness opportunities, parks and recreation opportunities, and overall opportunities for education, culture, and the arts. And then finally, overall quality of the transportation system in Boulder. All of these were rated either higher or much higher than both sets of benchmark comparisons. And where you don't see the double line, where you only see the bar charts for 2023, that indicates that that question was not asked in the previous survey. So we don't have trend data for that question. Our top individual community characteristics that we asked about on the survey. So we have in 2023, our top items were fitness opportunities, the availability of paths and walking trails, and recreational opportunities. All of those were rated positively by at least 9 in 10 residents. And we can see also the opportunities to volunteer, ease of travel by bicycle, opportunities to attend special events and festivals, ease of walking, and then opportunities to attend cultural arts and music activities. All of those were either higher or much higher than the national and the Front Range comparisons. Our next key finding, residents feel positive about economic aspects of Boulder, apart from cost of living. So the overall quality of business and service establishments in the city, this was rated positively by about 8 in 10 survey participants. And then we can also see about 3/4 of residents gave positive ratings to the vibrancy of the downtown commercial area and shopping opportunities. About 2/3 were pleased with the variety of business and service establishments as opposed to the quality. And then 57% gave excellent or good ratings to employment opportunities. As you can see, each of these was higher than either or both of the national and Front Range benchmark comparisons, with the exception of cost of living there at the very bottom of the chart, 6% positive in 2023. And this was much lower than both the national and the Front Range comparison. While scores for many city services have declined, Boulder still ranks highly among national and Front Range peers for several services. So the overall value of city services, we can see that there is a slight drop from 2018 to 2023, from 66% to 60% positive in 2023. However, this rating is similar to both the national and Front Range benchmarks. And then residents were asked their opinion on a total of 31 individual services on the survey. I won't cover each and every one of those here, but on this slide, we can see the top rated city services rising to the top with fire, sewer services, recreational opportunities, Boulder open space, drinking water, rec programs and classes, ambulance, recreation centers or facilities, preservation of national areas, and stormwater management and city parks. So these, again, were the top rated city services in Boulder, and those that were particularly higher than the national Front Range averages, you can see they're denoted by the stars. On the other end of the spectrum, these services were on the lower end in terms of positive ratings. So we have about half of residents or fewer gave positive ratings to each of these in 2023. Affordable high-speed internet access, snow removal, code enforcement, crime prevention, land use planning and zoning, and street repair. Each of these ratings did decrease from 2018 to 2023, with the exception of affordable high-speed internet access. We did not ask that question in 2023. Sorry, in 2018. Our next key finding, diversity, equity, and inclusion are important to residents and most feel welcome and accepted in the Boulder community. About 4 in 10 participants indicated that it is essential for local government to focus on creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive city. And another 1/4 of residents indicated that this is very important. Only 12% rated it as not at all important. Residents were asked how welcome and accepted they felt in various places around the city. About 9 in 10, or I should say more than 8 in 10 residents reported feeling very or somewhat welcome at city parks, trails, and facilities in the Boulder community based on their personal identity, and at city-sponsored community engagement activities. These questions were new on the 2023 survey, and they are also unique to Boulder, so we don't have benchmarks available for them. These are the same questions comparing those by racial demographics. So we see 77% of those who self-identified as an other race or multiracial considered the importance of the diversity as essential or very important. 70% of white residents did so. And then overall, as a whole, 69% of residents considered this to be essential or very important. And then to the right, you can see the breakdown of white versus other race or multiracial. And just to address the fact that we have very broad categories for these, for race and ethnicity, that is due to the numbers of responses that we saw for demographic subgroups such as race. We do disaggregate the data and provide cross tabulations by demographic characteristics and also by geographic location of residents. However, we can only do that to a certain point because subgroups with too few respondents in them, those comparisons yield very wide margins of error that make the data not very useful or actionable. Next key finding, homelessness is a significant problem in the city, and residents are supportive of funding community-based services for the homeless and those in need. So the wording of this question, how important to you, if at all, is it for the city to contribute funding to community-based organizations that provide each of the following services to the homeless population and others in need? So rising to the top of the list, at least 8 in 10 residents indicated that mental health programs, shelter during severe weather, and substance abuse programs were essential or very important. 79% supportive housing, and then also 73% housing and rental assistance programs. And then further, this question to the left, homelessness in Boulder, residents were asked how much of a problem, if at all, they felt homelessness was in the city of Boulder. And 63% indicated they thought it was a major problem, 29% a moderate problem, only 1% felt that it was not at all a problem. That is a recap of our key findings in 2023. And I'm happy to go back to any slides as we get into the Q&A. This is just a very quick snapshot of the POGO platform and the fact that you have the ability to ask follow-up questions on the platform and to dig deeper into some of these results and further reach out to residents. I'm happy to take questions.
Jade, thanks so much for that fantastic overview and dive into the survey results. Really appreciate both your original work on the survey and you being here tonight and explaining it. Council, any questions for Jade? And we did get some fantastic questions in advance, thanks to council members who sent those in for the answers that we got back on this. Tina.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, Jade and Sarah, for this presentation and for going over the results. It was really helpful. And thanks for spending extra time on the survey validity and the process behind it. It was also really great. And also, I asked a lot of questions in advance, so I had most of them answered separately. But I wanted to follow up on the question about which programs community members would support to address homelessness. And one of the questions I had is whether I get an overall sense as a council person that community members would support most programs to address homelessness, and this may not really serve as a ranking of which programs would be the best, in part because we don't offer cost or success rates alongside with the program. So I just want to make sure that there are no numbers here that would sort of caution one as saying, oh no, not that one. It didn't get as high of a, of a ranking as another one.
Yes, that is an excellent point. The questions such as these there's a few things to point out. First is the interpretation of the question itself and the way in which it is worded. We did not attach costs or sources of funding to this question. We also did not indicate where some of these facilities or services may be located in the city. All of these would likely have a pretty significant impact on resident ratings. And so this is an excellent opportunity to follow up with more specific questions that contain that information. I can see hands up, but I don't know who was next.
Can I ask a second? I had two questions. Can I?
Yes,
do this
yes,
one?
absolutely.
Yep, and my other question is just one metric that I was curious about was the decline in a sense of community. I think it was addressed two different ways. Do we have a sense with our demographics that the overall length of time of residence in Boulder has changed between 2018 and 2023?
That is a excellent question in terms of we call that length of residency, and that is a question that we asked on the survey. The average length of residency, if you will, that's actually not a metric that we calculate, but we easily could, and we could follow back up with you with that information.
That would be great. That's all I have. Thank you.
I've got Mark and then Tara.
Well, thank you for the presentation. I just have a couple of quick questions. Do you have a sense of how long it takes to fill out the survey? I mean, it looks like it's a very long survey.
It
And
is.
And is there any, I'm not sure how to express this. Is there some sort of bias that could be created by the fact that, only certain people are going to take the time and make the effort to fill this out? Probably people with more leisure time. I'm just not sure if it's a survey where the answers are not a little bit skewed because of its length and complexity. Is that possible?
Absolutely, that is something that we do factor into the results. So the survey is a 5-page paper survey, and you can also take it online. We try to make the survey as convenient to take as possible by offering online and paper options. We find in the survey industry that a 5-page survey is about the maximum that residents will tolerate, and that is why some of these questions are worded broadly as they are. There's just not enough space on this survey to dig deeply into some of these topics. That's better suited for follow-up, shorter form surveys. What you refer to in terms of those who don't respond is called non-response bias, and it is true that there is that is an attempt to define or at least acknowledge the fact that those that we did not hear from, who were invited to take the survey but who did not respond, may very well have different opinions from those who did. With that said, that is pretty substantially mitigated, especially in the Boulder survey, by the sheer number of responses that we received, with well over 800 responses, whereas a typical goal is about 400. So we did still receive a very high number of resident responses this year.
Okay, thank you. I guess my next question is, tourism is a key component of our economy. You didn't do any polling on the part of tourists, did you?
We did not attempt to incorporate tourist voices into this. This survey is specifically for Boulder residents.
What about Boulder businesses? For instance, the polling results for feeling safe in our downtown areas, I'm sure is a little bit different on the part of residents and business owners. And it would be interesting and important, I think, to know both.
Absolutely. We conduct a number of business surveys. Some of the questions overlap the community survey. Some of them are unique to businesses and try to identify challenges within the business community. That is absolutely something that we offer, but that was not included in the resident survey effort.
Okay, I think that kind of skews our overall picture a little bit, but all right, that's all I've got. Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Sure.
Mark, Tara?
All right, my first question, and kudos to the council members who asked all those questions ahead of time. Very impressive, council members. I wish I was as organized as you, but I'm not. So my two questions are, on page 73 of our packet, and in a few different places, it said, indicate how likely or unlikely you are to do each of the following, which then it says in your neighborhood during the day. What does that mean? How likely or unlikely you are to do each of the following in your neighborhood during the day? Like walk around in your neighborhood?
I think that is probably a typo. It says page 73,
Yeah.
and that is in the annotated tables, I believe. So I'll direct you actually to, I have the digital version in front of me,
Okay.
instead to page 22 in the report of results.
Okay.
Um,
22,
so
22,
mhm,
22. Okay. So
yeah,
my
so
question, let me just get
23 has the data visualization on it, page 23.
okay. So I guess my question then is, and let me just get there. Somebody like tell a joke or something. I'm scrolling.
I can actually just, I think, pop this over here,
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
and then just show you this. Yeah.
Thank you. So my question is why did you not say in your neighborhood during the night in or in downtown during the night? Why not during the night? Is that because everyone's scared at night or?
I mean, that is one way to put it. We actually did used to include during the day and at night as separate questions on our template surveys. We removed them actually just due to space constraints, and because what we found was very consistently that residents just feel less safe at night across the board, both in their neighborhoods and in downtown areas. With that said, that is certainly something we can add back in. It's just always a matter of trade-offs in terms of space on the survey.
I think for me, it would be interesting to know how people feel at night in the downtown commercial areas. Um, I think a lot of it, of course, has to do with lighting, probably, especially in neighborhoods. So there's that too, but I would be interested in just that one little change. Um, and then my second question was, when you asked about land use planning and zoning, that the people had a less positive view.
Yes. See
Did
if I can find that.
yeah. Better you than me, Jade.
There we go.
Um, what exactly does that mean? Like people don't, I mean, I would know what that means, but I would probably think, what do people think it means? That's my question.
Great question. All of the questions on the survey are the residents' perception and are very much impacted by that. You know, being a longtime resident myself and also conducting these surveys across the country for almost 10 years now, I would say anecdotally, Boulder residents probably have a better sense of what this term means than average residents elsewhere because it is something that's so often talked about.
Mhm.
And I would say, obviously though, there's also going to be residents who don't really have a good sense of all that this encompasses. So this really just is meant to be a broad capture of whatever the resident taking the survey, however they interpret that, and is very likely to also to be influenced if there's any particular zoning changes or development going on in their immediate area as well.
So you think it's mostly zoning and development that people feel negative or positive about how that's going in general?
Where we have seen, I would say in general, questions around growth, development, housing density, not just in Boulder, but nationwide, where we've seen declines, which is fairly often tend to be development related.
Like too
And
much development?
there's the perennial issue of we don't want any more development, but we also very much need more affordable housing.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
then that's of course just as much a problem in Boulder, if not more, as it is elsewhere.
Yep.
But
Okay.
that does, yeah.
Okay. That's it.
Thanks, Karen. Any other questions or do anyone? I guess we heard from Sarah. Maybe we're not trying to interpret the results tonight, but we can also make a couple comments if we would like. Ryan.
Thanks, Aaron, and thank you, Jay. Thank you for all this this work and going through that all in such an expeditious manner. I sent a few questions in, but they were just a couple of hours ago, so I'm sorry to do that. And I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but I have a few questions that are kind of on the theme, I think, of what Sarah said, not to worry too much about. which is action. And I mean, maybe I'll just put it this way. Normally, when I think about doing anything like a customer service survey or a survey of people whose experience I'm interested in, it's with the goal of informing action. Like it's sort of not that interesting on its own to know whether somebody is satisfied or not, so much as it is what are their actual needs and preferences, so that I can help get them what they need. And Tara's point here on land use, I think, is really worth zeroing in on, because I think, we have a national trend of urbanization and increasing economic inequality, which is driving a ton of issues in towns like Boulder around housing. And people who have the belief that we need to suppress the migration into cities are not going to be happy with the direction. And people who have tuned into the science and the planning that says, actually, what we need to do is we need to let more people live near where they need to go. I mean, both of those groups are going to be more unhappy under this scenario, and asking them about their level of satisfaction doesn't tell us as much as what asking, where we might go could be. So anyway, that's just one example. And I don't mean to be critical, but I'm just thinking about, in general, in the survey, where are the places where we can identify needs or preferences that or maybe just action opportunities at like the high level. Like what are some of the big opportunities this tells us that Boulder should do, based on what we've heard from people. And I'm sorry, Sarah, you can call me off if we shouldn't talk about that yet, but that's sort of my big question.
Well, I can briefly jump in here and just say that that's actually a wonderful segue and topic to very much dig deeper into. We see this as very often a strong focus in strategic planning sessions and next steps workshops that we conduct. In terms of using surveys to inform, it's a very useful tool in order to do that, especially in a special topic survey where it is pretty vital that the respondent have full information before being able to rate whatever it is that they are rating. They're going to rate, X housing development potentially very differently depending on where it's located in the city. That's just one example, or how much it will cost, et cetera. That is a great opportunity for just further, like a special topics, shorter form survey where we can ask a much more detailed question. And even if it's an online only survey, what we really see communities doing more so is if it's a development plan where there's a mock-up or something, we can include images as well and ask residents to provide their comments and thoughts there as well. Lots of different ways to approach this.
Okay, thanks. Maybe I'll just ask one more question and I'll try to leave it at that. It's kind of a different phrasing. How should this be useful to city council? I mean, not in phase 2, but in this phase, what are implications that we should take from what we have here? Like just some, I mean, I've read the executive summary, I see what's here, but I maybe just in your words, like, what do we do? What should we do with this?
Great question. In general, the biggest drop that we saw here to crime prevention, which is its own wheelhouse and separate from land use and development. So I do want to broadly say here that we have seen safety ratings drop in virtually all communities nationwide. And I know that sounds dramatic, but it's pretty consistently true. We have seen that particularly in conjunction with the rise of very high profile news cases where there's been instances of officer involved crime and such. So that has had a pretty profound, George Floyd, that's had a pretty profound impact in safety ratings, many of the communities where we work. So that's important context, especially as you review the safety related issues on the survey, which we didn't really dive into too much here. Regarding the other items that you see here, snow removal is always an interesting example to use because it is entirely dependent, in our experience, on the last snow that residents remember or the last bad snowstorm. And so if we can, we can survey in the same community in March and then survey again in, September, and they get much better ratings in September because it's a little bit further back in memory. But with that said, we're looking at these particular line items, code enforcement, land use, as part of a larger picture. And so when we see declines in all of these categories, again, it's just another indicator to really dig deeper into why, and where I think you could really get more detail without having to do any more work. There are cross tabulations by geographic area is one of the appendices in the report. And so that can also give pretty good insight into, okay, well, in what areas of town are residents most or least pleased with, for example, code enforcement and land use, and give you a better idea of where specifically to focus.
I was going to get to this after the discussion, but we are going to be talking about some next steps to really get to that question of what does this data mean and how should we respond to it, including some engagement opportunities that we're proposing in February. And one way we might look at it, Councilmember Shard, is to look at the areas where we got these very low ratings and really do some questioning of community about why do you think this is and what does this signal for us that we need to be doing differently. So I think there will be opportunities to dive deeper. And we could look at any of the data in this survey, but I suggest that it probably makes the most sense to look at the ones where our community is saying, hey, you need to pay attention here.
Thanks for that, Sarah. And thanks for those questions, Ryan, because I was going to ask a question about next steps. So that's great. You'll be addressing that once we're done with our questions and comments. Nicole and then Taisha.
Thank you, Mayor. Sarah, I think this one is probably a question for you. And if you'd rather answer it in the next part, that's okay too. But I'm just wondering, what can we do differently to get a better sense of how the communities feel that we haven't really given a compelling reason to respond to the survey? So the people who are kind of missing here in terms of their representation. And I'm really curious what issues they're noting. And I'm asking this not just from an equitable representation perspective, but also from making our city safer and more resilient perspective, because the people who are experiencing the worst impacts of our economic and climate and social challenges are really on the front lines of all the problems that we're facing in the community. And so to not have their perspective as we're thinking about what are next steps and how are we going to use this data, it just feels like a really big gap and like we're missing some critical information that we're going to need as we are moving forward to address our sustainability and equity and resilience goals. So sorry,
that's a great
comment.
I think it's a great question. And I think what I want to be really clear about is that no one technique for hearing from community is the be all end all technique. And I think that, some of the other things we're doing in the engagement space to really have focused conversations and in targeted interviews with individuals who might be much more comfortable giving their feedback in a verbal way anyhow, is critically important. The work you all have been doing or just before the budget, where the community connectors worked with communities of color and other populations in our area that we don't hear from quite as often about what their priorities are. That should be overlaying on this survey. We shouldn't be looking at any one thing as the one thing, the gospel of what the community thinks. And I think from an equitable perspective, we know that there are preferred ways, more comfortable ways where people are going to give information. And it's often built on relationships and trust, right? And a paper survey or an online survey doesn't convey that. So what I see this survey helping us do is reach sort of the missing middle who don't participate because they don't have as much time versus they don't participate because they don't think their voice will be heard. Some of the other engagement and trust building and capacity we're building is better to fill that gap. So you have to look at all of these sources of information and the different techniques in their totality, I think.
I could add to this too. In fact, I could actually talk about this for an hour, but I will try to restrain myself. This is a very a topic that I have been that our company has been very, very involved in, especially recently as we try to really dig into what we call hard to reach residents. And I did address some of this in the written comments, but I'll briefly revisit here to say that it is, a continual, I guess, frustration and paradox in survey research that those underrepresented voices that we are trying to hear from are those that are the least likely to respond to surveys, and they are the hardest to reach. And this makes sense in the sense of, you think of younger residents or those with families who might be lower income, who, they have a lot going on and are not going to have the luxury sometimes of taking time to sit and take a long survey such as this. With that said, and then in a community like Boulder as well, when we do a random sample survey of the entire population, while it is representative to a certain extent, when we have relatively small subgroups, minority groups, and demographic groups, there's a conundrum there in which, yes, we are technically getting the correct portion based on who lives in the community, and it is still not nearly enough voices for us to be able to draw conclusions from in terms of subgroup comparisons. Our goal for subgroup comparisons, just to give some insight, is if we have 100 respondents in each particular subgroup, that would give us a margin of error of plus or minus 10% around those results, which is still pretty wide, but it's close enough to be actionable. That would require an enormous amount of oversampling, or the approach we've had some success with is actually targeting households. There's census data available for primary language spoken at home, and this is again from self-reported census data, from ethnic or racial groups that we can oversample or particularly target with survey efforts. There's a lot of different ways in which we are trying to address this problem and include more of these voices, and certainly be a much larger part of the conversation and the prep for the next community survey, but also should be part of the conversation in any interim surveying or polling that we do between now and then as well.
Nicole, did you have anything else? Okay, I've got Taisha and then Tara.
Thank you so much for all of this work. As a newly elected data who values and loves data. This is really critical. So I just wanted to share just my approach of when I read these kinds of things as a new council member, so we can better understand. So the first thing I do is I find out more about the firm who conducted the research. So I was well aware of the accolades and the exclusive partnership with the National League of Cities, and was really excited to read the report. So that's always the first thing that I do, is find out who actually conducted the research, and who else are they working with. And so I saw that you worked with lots of other cities across the country, and that was also very, very grounding for me as I went into the research. The second thing I do is I go and I find out who responded to the research. I don't even read the first sections, because if I read the first sections without knowing who responded to the survey, then I'm going to assume that this information is going to include all the people in all the ways that I'm thinking that it's going to happen. And so what happens when I go back in to read the actual piece there, and I'm going to just say, when I got to page 194, I believe, my heart was broken. To see white, non-white, Hispanic, not Hispanic, it was very difficult to see. And it actually made sense why community of color feel the way that many of us feel, this erasure. That's what erasure looks like. And so I also come to this dais, this virtual dais, having been a trainer of equitable research practices to researchers, when in some of my previous experiences with a world-renowned research institution that had been around for 75 years. And one of the things that struck me is that there's a whole body of research around equitable research practices. And one of them is really around not only ensuring that we're disaggregating, but that within a particular category, but that we're also cross-aggregating, right? Because I need to know what this looks like from all of the different intersections that you already have the data for. And so when we give these high level presentations, unfortunately, the unintended consequences can be the fact that we actually end up erasing the very people that we say are now a priority. A people whose labor, again, was used to purchase this land. A people whose land this actually is with our Indigenous brothers, sisters, and others. And so I'm very, very mindful about marginalized people and marginalized groups as somebody who's been here for 11 years. So again, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background and context of some of the questions that I asked. And thank you, staff. Again, I went to staff directly. And again, thank you for allowing those to be public as other council members and community members may have had questions. And if anything, I want our community members to know that I care, that we do care, that we aren't going to just imagine a world where you are, where that said Black, all other races. Imagine a world. I don't even care if it's true. It's just, and again, we all have our own set of best practices, right? One of the best practices that I use, many of them come from the Why Am I Always Being researched by Chicago Beyond or Beyond Chicago, and and many others actually in the research community. I also work with researchers in NOAA and all different kinds of places at the state, federal, nonprofit, et cetera. And it's been really wonderful to see that disaggregation. And so I'm actually very eager for the next steps. I'm also concerned around some of the siloing of our research. And again, this is something that I'm excited to work with the team on because, as you said, we have that data around racial and ethnic perspectives, et cetera, but where is it? If it's not crosswalked, I think of also the incredible work by the Emergency Family Assistance Center and the incredible survey that they did. What I would love to see, if we're talking about a community survey, I want to see the community survey. I want to see all of the dimensions of our incredibly rich and dynamic community. Their voices are valued and necessary. And might I bring up, this is not who we are, actually played off of the riff of Boulder is the most beautiful place to live or happiest place to live. There's a whole documentary around that. And so again, to have this presentation start off with Boulder is the most happiest place or the 98%. Again, there is significant overrepresentation in the data. There's only 17 Black people who responded between the open survey and the statistical survey. That can't even begin to gather the diversity within the diversity within the diversity of the diaspora. And so again, I am just eager for us to find ways that we can integrate and align our qualitative framework. I continue to, and I'm eager to work with all of you. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm getting all my points. Yes, I think I got them all, but thank you again. And again, I'm really excited to work with you all to make sure that Boulder is cutting edge when it comes to implementing equitable research practices. Unfortunately, I feel like we've got a ways to go with this. Also with the Hispanic, non-Hispanic part, are people with disabilities. I know we didn't ask for that disaggregation level, but again, there are dimensions. And so I'm eager to hear more from our communities with people with disabilities, LGBTQAI+, even in the breakdown, it was like male, female, there was no trans, there was no, come on. We know what we could be asking, and I just want us to be leaders. I want us to be leaders in making sure that we're telling the fuller picture. So thank you so much. And again, I read your comments and to my questions, so I really appreciate that. But again, I also know a set of best practices that says something else. And so I'm eager. And also, again, I'm hopeful that we can have more researchers of color on our teams to make sure that that important perspective is there. Because quite frankly, I think that because there's more researchers of color, we are actually able to now ask these more difficult and challenging questions. But again, we have the data to do the disaggregation. So I look forward to continue to work with you and with all of you. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks very much for that, Taisha.
I thank you for your comments, very much written and spoken. Very much appreciate the candid feedback. And I did respond, we did respond in written form, but just to really underscore there, it's true, the randomized nature of the community survey is not capturing enough responses from our subgroups, from our minority groups, to be able to disaggregate the data in a way that still provides statistical meaning. In order to do that, we would need to considerably oversample and specifically seek out and target households of with families of color.
Thank you,
Those,
Jade. I really
yes,
appreciate that mention about the oversampling. I did have that as a note and I didn't bring that up, but that is what you traditionally do. You do go that extra mile. And again, remember that part where I said that the labor and all that stuff and all the laws, right? So this is not charity. This is really, reconciliation. This is really this is not some extravagant externality, but this is really deserved and it's just. Thank you.
absolutely. With enough responses, we can change the way that waiting table looks. If we have a sufficient number of responses from residents in each of those race categories, we can weight with more granularity. We can statistically weight with more responses in those groups. So very much appreciate your comments and your thoughts there.
Thanks for that. I've got Tara.
This is comment time, right, Aaron?
Yeah, whatever you like.
Okay, so I
Okay.
just wanted to say that this was really helpful to me on a lot of levels. I'd say from like a big picture point of view, especially seeing the difference, like how men and women see things, and I think there's so much we can do with this. Of course, women like safety more. Well, they're not like safety more. They're more affected by safety, I would say, which we all kind of knew. But I feel like I'm excited to how we can use this as a way this was a great way to hear from the community on a large level and see where people, let's say, of different economic backgrounds agree or disagree, and where people in general agree, like across the board on X or Y, let's say, affordability, for instance. And I can see, not on every place, but in some places we can definitely make a difference in the low-hanging fruit, for instance, snow removal. So I'm excited to see next steps and where we can make a difference. We obviously can't do everything here because it's not under our purview, but there are things we can do to make things a little bit better for a lot of people. And so I'm excited how we can use this survey. It was very interesting reading, and I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Now I got Matt.
Appreciate that, Aaron. So since we're sort of going into some comments and points on this, first, just thank you for this. It's extremely comprehensive, and your reputation certainly precedes you guys. And if ironically, when I was in DC for a conference, and your firm was brought up by a number of cities and National League of Cities with regards to some other work. So definitely you have a strong reputation. I'm just appreciative of how we started to build some of this. And yes, we have a gap between 2018 and 2023, but hopefully we can avoid having that gap again, certainly with external circumstances, and get a little bit more dialed in on what those pieces are. But I think what really impresses me is sticking with those national best practices. It's easy, the temptation, and I've seen this in a lot of sort of like educational assessment that we've done when I was at the university, is you want to somehow make it specific to your needs. And it's really easy to fall into that because that's where you want to go, but then you lose the ability to make those comparisons and then know where you are in space. And so it's hard to balance those things, but I appreciate your best efforts to do so. And something that came about that I thought was rather interesting were things in the survey that I think a lot of us, from the anecdotal responses we get from community, really were kind of opposite. And I found that fascinating. One in particular was with regards to the ease of travel by car and ease of public parking. We hear the opposite of that, but to see that it's actually significantly improved from 2016, 2018 to now, I think is a really good sort of grounding moment for us in the community. I think it also sort of gets rid of this narrative that somehow we are only doing things with regards to bikes. But clearly our car infrastructure is doing just fine by the survey. And so that's cause for us to think about what are next steps of how do we rebalance what we're doing with regards to vehicles and bikes. So I think this is really helpful for us in that sense. And the timing of this couldn't be better going into our retreat. here in a couple months, because I think there's some nuggets in here that give us confidence in moving in certain directions, should we choose to do so as a council. So again, just wanted to say thank you, and there's just a lot of good stuff that I think we're going to be digesting for some time here, and really appreciate it. And to something that Taisha brought up, I think, you know, whether it's through your firm or in other things we do maybe separately, I do think it's really important for us to start to really dive into some of these subgroups. And I say that in form of the demographics within a survey that may not make statistically relevant in a comprehensive survey like this, but if we go to them individually and survey them as a group unto themselves, we can suss out, I think, some greater information that we can then fold back into this larger comprehensive understanding of where our community at and where different groups are. So I think that'd be something I'd be interested to, certainly on the engagement committee side of things. I know that's more council and community, but that might be something for us to look forward to down the road, just so we know where some of these other communities who are maybe not being fully understood in this comprehensive survey, where they stand on a number of these issues. So really excited about those opportunities. Again, great work, and thank you so much.
Thank you for the comments. I do want to briefly say, since we're talking about further engagement as well, and it was mentioned earlier, different methods of outreach, such as the in-person interviews, focus groups, that sort of thing. And there was a question earlier, of course, about different types of bias in surveying. And so it is important to note that in-person interviews, phone interviews, any type of interaction with where you're speaking to an actual person, that elicits something called positive response bias. So that is something to keep in mind. People are more likely to give you a positive rating if they're talking to you versus filling out a survey on paper or online. A good balance here that I want to just put out there for you all to keep in mind for further surveying is this is very quantitative data and not very qualitative. Following up with online short form surveys gives you the opportunity to allow write-in responses, and those can be really useful. Again, qualitative, but can provide more insight into maybe the why behind the, we can tell, a survey tells us what residents think, not why they think it. We can provide additional insight there.
Great, thanks again, Lauren. And I have one quick thing myself.
Thank you. I have to say that I'm most interested in hearing our most steps section coming up next. So I might have some more comments again after that. But I think for me, especially after hearing Taisha's comments, I have a lot of concern that we didn't oversample. I think that while this information might be useful in seeing trends over time, I don't feel like we can go forward with a lot of confidence with some of the gaps that I feel like these have, because just not only gaps in terms of the lack of oversampling, but not knowing really how people interpret this. And I get that we can follow up with more detail later, but I wouldn't want us to move forward with sort of a level of overconfidence that could end us in trouble based on the information. I think we should be honest with ourselves about where the strengths in this lie and where we still have need to fill in with to create a higher level of certainty. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Lauren.
I do want to point out too, there is one level of oversampling that is built into our methods, and that is oversampling multifamily housing. That has long been something that we have done because those who live in attached housing are also part of that hard to reach group that under respond to surveys compared to their counterparts. And so we oversample by a 5-to-3 ratio in order to elicit more responses from those residents. And those who live in multifamily housing also tend to be hit of some of those other check boxes in terms of younger residents or those who may be lower income who are also not hearing enough from. So I do want to just acknowledge that there is some oversampling certainly built into our methodology, and it's also clear that there could certainly be more and different oversampling taken into consideration for future efforts.
I understand. I got Ryan and then Taisha.
Thanks, Aaron. Just on the comment side, two things. First, I want to lift up what Taisha said and that Lauren just underlined. This is incredibly important, and I wish I had spent more time in noticing this issue myself. And we'll be eager when we talk about next steps to understand if there are things we can do to enhance our fidelity to the communities that we need to be paying more attention to in this part of the work, and also really put a marker that for the next time we do an exercise like this, that we're spending the time and the resources to really try to get that right. So that's my first comment. My second comment is to agree with Matt, and I just think it's kind of it's quite the statement that the ease of public parking is up from 32% a few years ago to 54%. I guess that's satisfaction. And ease of travel by car is up from 39% to 64%. So just, I mean, these are just a lot of improvement in those categories. Conversely, public transportation from 63% down to 56%, air quality from 81% down to 62%. I think this gives us some analytical grounding that Matt pointed out that should tell us we need to get a lot more focused and aggressive about creating a less car dependent, more multimodal human-centered transportation system. It's focused on access and accessibility over vehicle throughput. So thanks for that, Matt, for bringing that up. That's all I have.
Thanks. Taisha?
Thank you. Also, just want to echo Matt's comments. I mean, again, it is a delicate balance about making sure that we can be able to do comparisons across cities. At the same time, it is Boulder's tradition to lead the way and help other cities make the changes that need to happen. So I'm really excited again to find and strike that balance with all of you. I also wanted to lift up another critical part of our community that wasn't included in this, and that's our unhoused. These are former teachers in our community, 30-year veteran teachers. These are scientists. These are, and quite frankly, although I care to know, similarly as a renter, I care to know what people who own homes think a rent program should look like, or men and what they think a women's program should look like, for example. But honestly, I think it's absolutely critical. And I was really impressed by Los Angeles. I think they did the most recent largest survey of unhoused people. I think they had 1,300 respondents to that survey, and it was really powerful to hear. And again, to see some of the alignments with some of the things that are on the table from the homeless solutions section, as well as some of the things that aren't. So as we continue to consider next steps, I'm eager to find out what our unhoused community wants. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your comments there. That the unhoused and homeless population is by definition, I would say, the hardest to reach, and that we do not have a physical address in which we can get to these folks. With that said, there are obviously other means of contact, and homelessness is an issue in Boulder. It's an issue in many communities in which we work. And so you're absolutely right. Capturing these voices and the challenges that they face is also extremely important, in addition to those who have actual residences here in Boulder.
Good. Well, so my big question is a segue to Sarah, which is how is the city going to make use of this information in next steps that we take in our community, keeping in mind the extremely important comments made by Taisha and some other folks here about who was sampled and who was being represented in this data. So Sarah, maybe you can talk to us about next steps here coming out from this.
Sure. So I think in general, some of the really great learnings just from the comments tonight and some places that we can explore is how we approach surveying across, for the future, for all surveys that we do in the city and other ways of gathering research. In terms of this particular community survey, I can tell you that outside the context of council, the city manager's office and directors are already starting to really absorb the data, dissect the data, ask questions about what it may or may not mean. And the city manager will continue to work with us on the sort of changes we might want to make in shifting our priorities around the operations of the city. So services that are more operational in nature. For council, I think you have a unique opportunity given the timing of the survey. As a couple of you mentioned, we have some new council members, so you're just sort of starting to look at the totality of all the ways we get feedback from our community, and though that totality should be shaping your priorities. As I think we've said previously, we are looking at doing a council retreat probably in March, still trying to settle on some dates, but that's a little different than the January retreat that we used to do. And that gives us a couple of months, not a lot of time, but to do some more community outreach and engagement around this particular survey tool if we wish to try to get more feedback around some of those areas where we didn't score as well or where it's gone down, to understand what some of the implications are. Later this month, my team will meet with your two newly appointed council engagement subcommittee members, Matt and Tara. We have a meeting scheduled. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is a question that Matt asked me, which is, when do we get to hear the community's response to the survey? And when can we dive deeper into where there might be appropriate lanes of action for us to take? And spoiler alert, we're going to recommend to the subcommittee staff that we hold at least one community open house that really allows us to look at this data with community members in a public participation kind of context. And we hope many of you will be able to join us. That will be ideally sometime in February, so that at least for that sliver of engagement, you can bring it into your retreat. As you know, your retreat is typically a time where you either refine priorities or identify priorities from a policy perspective, and this survey can be part of what informs that. Again, it's only part of what should be informing that. And also it's an opportunity to talk about any process changes you might make. And so there could be some feedback that we could get at the open house around some possible process changes as well. So we intend to use the next month to go deeper into what the data is telling us, and start to think about ways that we can do even better jobs of collecting feedback in a more equitable and representative way in our community.
Mary, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I just want, this has been a fabulous conversation in my perspective, and I appreciate the conversations I've had with some of you before this meeting. And wanted to add, I know that Ryan has just invited me to a meeting with the community connectors on this very data as well, and that this is both the substantive comments of this data point that we have in time and pushing us to continue to consider, are there different ways? Are there better ways? Are there deeper ways to think about how we're representing the totality of our community, are welcome. We have been thinking about some of that internally, and I know we're still working on sort of thinking about the equity index we created that just starts to disaggregate data. I know we've been thinking about partnering with other possible partners in community that are really taking a deeper look at what disaggregation or decolonization of data looks like. So please know that we hear what you're saying, we understand it, and we lift up that balance of this is information that we have at a moment, and how do we balance those as we move forward. So I just wanted to share out an appreciation for the candor of the conversation as we continue to listen and improve ways in which we're hearing, if you will.
Thanks for that. Lauren, Tina, and Nicole.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand that this is the data that we have right now, but I think as we move forward with sharing it out, you know, that we need to be clear and transparent about what this data represents and what it doesn't represent. And so I would encourage you to also think about how we are communicating the holes or gaps in this data as part of that communication process that we're having with the community. Thank you.
Tina, Nicole, and Tara. Nope, Tina dropped out.
Oh, here I am. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of echoing what Lauren is saying, and also I think relative to Taisha, that this data is just one small way of finding out what's going on in the community. We have lots of different ways to reach out to people, and we should be reaching out particularly to people who are not necessarily represented. And also just being cautious with things, even like the parking. One big difference between 2018 and 2023 is that we're now at a 30 to 35% vacancy rate in our offices downtown. And so when we see these big shifts in the post-COVID environment, how can we just do a little bit of extra communication around, what is the cause of this sentiment that's causing the experience? It may not have anything to do with having built more parking or encouraged cars, but just this really big, change in our environment after the pandemic. Thanks.
Nicole and Tara?
You, I just wanted to kind of asterisk Lauren's idea around sharing out, some of the context when we do share out that survey, just kind of capturing some of the things that we've talked about tonight. Love that idea, and would like to see that moving forward. I was also wondering because, what you were talking about, Sarah, was that we are getting some of this information to try to inform the retreat and our thinking around the retreat. Can we, before the retreat, hear about the connectors discussion, if they're open to sharing some things with us, as well as kind of the community thoughts from the engagement with the survey? I think that would be really wonderful to hear as well. And I just wanted to kind of get back to a point that Taisha made about silos. And I think just sort of a future ask for the engagement committee or whoever's looking at this in the future is that when we're getting information from a survey like this, that is just one piece of a bigger puzzle. Can we maybe not just get it as one piece, but kind of get a fuller picture as we're interpreting it, just so that we're not kind of led to thinking that this is one piece? Because I think sometimes when it gets communicated out to community, and even when we're hearing it, it can sometimes feel like this is it, this is the picture. And then it gets hard to kind of undo that message that it's not the whole picture, it's just one piece. So I'm just wondering about in the future, if we can kind of hear more of it, more of that picture together, because I know that there are many other ways that you all are engaging with community and that we're hearing from people. And I know it would be a longer meeting, but I think it would be a potentially helpful one there. So just a flag for the next time this comes around. Thanks.
I'll get Tara, and then maybe we'll wrap up.
Well, I just want to say that as somebody who's done a lot of community engagement, including go to all different neighborhoods, door to door, talk to people on the phone of all types, what is great about this survey is that sometimes across the board in all our different communities in general, not detailed, because I agree with you that I wish that I could call up some of those people and say, well, why do you feel this way exactly? It wasn't enough information, but in general, you can say most people, 90%, 80% feel this way. And I think there's a lot we can use this for. So I hope we don't just throw out the baby with the bathwater. That's a bad phrase. But I just hope that we can use this for some things, because the community is trying to tell us something, and not everybody reads and I'm not pointing fingers, but it's hard to read all the emails that come our way. I mean, there's so many of them. So this is one glance into how people in the community feel. And I think it's fine to say, okay, we have things that we can do better. And even though it wasn't perfect and we wish it was this and that, still in all, this is another way for us to know how many people in the community feel. And so I hope we don't just throw it out because of the many reasons we'd like to, but we can use it as one part of the many ways that we try to engage community, all of us separately and together as a city. And so that's what I have to say.
Tara, thanks. Taisha?
I just want to assure Tara that or Commissioner or Councilwoman, sorry, I'm still acclimating to the new role.
Tara's good.
I'm no longer a commissioner. We're no longer commissioners. We are council folks, and that's awesome. Tara, I have no Commissioner, Councilwoman Weiner. I have no intention. This is definitely valid. It's just you need to know what it's valid in. Whose voices are we hearing in it? That's all. And when we don't provide the limitations of the survey data and findings in our reporting, people don't know what the limitations are. And unfortunately, then they think that this is what everybody feels. And so that's really the challenge. But I would argue, no, this is a very valuable, in all of my comments, there is value in this survey. And I look forward to leveraging every single scrap of what we can use to make sure to strengthen our city collectively. So thank you so much.
All right. And with that, then Jade, we'll just thank you so much for all the work that you did to get us to this point. And while we're talking about ways in which we can do other things and better things in the future, we do have a great set of data in front of us, as Tara and Taisha just noted. So really appreciate everything that you did to make this happen, for joining us here tonight.
Thank you all very much for your thoughtful comments and feedback, and happy to continue the conversation and help brainstorm ways to continue to reach these segments of the community that we currently are challenged by. So thanks again for your time tonight.
Absolutely. Okay, and with that, we'll wrap up this item. And Elisha, if we can go to our next matter, please.
Yes, sir. Our next item under matters from the city manager is item 5B. It is the update on the facilities master plan implementation.
Thanks so much, Alicia. And I know this is one, council members, that you have heard a lot about. I certainly hear a lot about it and appreciate all the intentionality that Joanna and her team put to this. So Joanna, I'll kick it off to you before we send it to Michelle.
Wonderful. Good evening, council members. I'm Joanna Crane. I'm the Director of Facilities and Fleet. And as was mentioned, we're going to be talking about the Facilities Master Plan. But I do want to begin by recognizing the term master. Obviously, that's not something we want to continue using. It's a reflection of what we have had in the past. And so I do want to acknowledge that we are working to get that term removed, as well as figure out what the common terms that we want to be using going forward. So our facilities plan was actually accepted by council in October 2021. And it was significant in the sense it was our first comprehensive strategic view of all of our city buildings, and then laid the groundwork for how we're advancing our work across our building portfolio. So the purpose of tonight is to provide an update and context on the plan, as well as an update on the financial strategy in terms of implementing that. And so this will hopefully help inform council ahead of some important decisions that we'll be bringing forward later this year, as well as next year, on a variety of projects, some of which you have, I'm sure, heard about, like the Western City Campus. So with that, I will pass it over to Michelle Crane, who is the city's architect and senior manager, and she'll lead our presentation this evening.
Thanks, Joanna, and good evening, council members. It's a pleasure to be here in front of you again, talking about our city buildings and the importance and impact they have, these valuable assets. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the presentation.
And Michelle, do you want to address about how you'll be in the 3 sections with pauses?
I will, yes. I have that in the early part. Let's see. Can everyone see that? Great. Yeah, I will get to that in just a moment, just how we'll break down the discussion tonight to just kind of bring it into chunks for people to give us comments and feedback. So I am going to start, though, before I get to that, with just quickly going over the key issues that we have been talking about in our master plan or in our plan for a while now. And these key issues are, one, our current buildings are old, and they are not currently meeting our social, our environmental, or our financial goals. And the city also has a history of underfunding our operations and maintenance, and it has resulted in a large deferred maintenance backlog. So we're constantly addressing emergencies and responding to failures in buildings. And lastly, the big issue that we want to address and surface tonight is the importance of a well-funded operations and maintenance plan, not only to lower our total cost of ownership, but also as a key climate and resilience strategy. So our purpose here in the study session is to emphasize the importance of taking care of these large investments we're going to talk about after we complete those initial constructions, And we're going to talk about ways we can accomplish that. So to Erin, to your point, this is the way we've gone ahead and structured the conversation for this evening. What I'm going to start with is first providing a background and just some key information on our facilities plan and the long-term financial strategy that we presented to council last May. We want to recap some of the policy direction we received at that meeting, and then we'll stop and we'll pause for any questions around the plan itself or that financial strategy. Would love to get some feedback on that work. Then in the second section, we'll come back and I'm going to dive a little deeper into the Maintain Well key initiative of our plan and go more into how this is really a climate resilient strategy. And I'll also touch on the key capital projects that we are advancing this year. And then again, we'll pause and we'll allow some time for questions and discussion on those two pieces. And then lastly, I'm going to provide some background and update on the work we've been doing exploring a public-private partnership to help us accomplish all of these goals. And that'll be kind of the last pause when we can allow for some more questions on that particular work. So in each section, we will pause and allow council some time to just have some feedback on what we had just discussed and any questions.
Hey, Michelle, I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't know if you can come a little closer. We're getting a little bit of crazy feedback or just disruption.
Sure. Is that any better? Hopefully. Okay. So what we are hoping that you walk away with this evening is just a good understanding of the current situation in our building portfolio and the solutions we're developing to address the challenges as we move ahead. And as Joanna mentioned, there will be decisions coming forward to council both this year and next. And so hopefully this is some good grounding and background ahead of those. A lot of those decisions will come either through specific projects or a lot of them will come through our 2025 budget process. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'll move into just some background on our facilities master plan. So our city building portfolio consists of about 75 buildings and just under 2 million square feet and is at a current replacement value of about $700 million. We have some buildings across the city that have been dispersed by design to serve specific areas of the community, and others that have been added over time in a much less intentional way that now are actually creating challenges for our community accessing services, and they make it hard for staff to work together and take care of these buildings efficiently. Our buildings are on average about 50 years old, and half of them roughly were built before or prior to the 1970s. We have underinvested for decades in their maintenance, and the result is that we are regularly chasing failures like some of these photos you're seeing on the screen. Last year, we requested $1.3 million outside of our budget cycle to respond to emergency repairs in buildings. In our facilities plan, we discuss the lifespan of a building and this point when operations and maintenance becomes exponentially more expensive and sort of after this inflection point. We are at or past that inflection point in many, if not most, of our buildings. And we are again struggling to keep up with repairs. And fixes come at the cost of abrupt disruption of services to our community. When we make costly repairs under emergency conditions, we are failing to address climate, resiliency, or social goals for our buildings. So we're simply kind of fixing the brakes and trying to get things back up running quickly. In past presentations, I've discussed this in depth in financial terms and about the higher total costs of owning buildings and operating them in this manner. But tonight, I also want to present the importance of ongoing preventative operations and maintenance as part of a strategy to address the climate crisis. And keeping buildings reliably operating means reliable programs and services to our community. This is resiliency, and it ensures that those who most need our services can get them when they need them. So our facilities plan looks to chart a new course from that which I just described. We are proposing solutions and a framework to make strategic investments in buildings so that when we invest, we are making impact on all of our city goals. Two key initiatives were proposed that are fundamental to turning the tides on our city buildings and making these positive impacts. The Maintain Well key initiative, so that is taking care of what we have in all of our city buildings, will result in these 4 principal outcomes. So a lower total cost of ownership, achieving our climate action targets and decarbonizing our building stock, resiliency through reliability and predictability. And lastly, we improve equity when we take care of the places that all people come for services and ensuring quality access. The other key initiative was to consolidate services. So those I mentioned that have become scattered or sometimes duplicated across the city over time. And this will result in greatly improved customer service experience, both in the physical way people experience our buildings themselves, but also operationally and how we deliver our services in a more centralized and consistent manner. Modern facilities will provide better accessibility. They can provide all-inclusive amenities, features. We can provide better, healthy indoor air environments, which is increasingly critical as our outdoor environment degrades. And through consolidation, we can address duplication of services and buildings and provide more functional, flexible spaces that can be better adapted to the future when needs change. And we are building high-performing buildings that conserve resources like water, are highly efficient, provide redundancy and resiliency, and reduce our carbon impact. So last May, we presented a long-term financial strategy to help implement these key initiatives. And that strategy identified some key ingredients that are very specific to buildings that could be leveraged to help fund large building projects. So each block here represents a various funding source that, when it's combined, is how we develop a total funding necessary for a project. It's made up of, you see in blue, city dollars from our general fund or other dedicated sources. And the orange blocks here represent really unique opportunities in buildings to provide or generate funds through efficiency. I'll talk later about these generated efficiency funds as part of what we call an availability payment in a P3 structure. But when we vacate current buildings, so poorly performing, inefficient buildings, we can capture savings and they become annual funds towards efficiency or efficiently operating and maintaining new projects. We can also avoid large infrastructure replacement costs in current buildings. And lastly, when we vacate old buildings as part of a consolidation, the sale of some of those buildings will generate proceeds necessary to help fund new capital projects. So leveraging these orange blocks in particular is essential to both reduce sort of the initial capital that we need on a project for one-time sources, but it's also used to reduce the amount of ongoing debt financing. We have shown in the past how vacating buildings to consolidate services and staff to the new Western City campus at Alpine Balsam could unlock several $1 million annually, now directed towards these existing buildings. We avoid millions in future infrastructure needs in these buildings. And again, the sale of some of them could provide significant additional one-time funding. Most of the buildings being vacated are in the civic area, and we, our team, are part of that team working on that next phase of development. So we will be bringing more information specific around our city buildings and decisions that need to be made as that project advances. So again, in May of last year, we proposed 2 key policies from that long-term financial plan I just went through that were supported by council to help fund and maintain new building projects. First is to dispose of city properties that will be vacated by consolidation. And what disposal really means is not repurposing them for something else once staff vacate, but either tearing them down, which is the case for 2 of our buildings, New Britain and Park Central, which are in our high hazard flood zone, or selling them for future private development. The second policy was to ring fence savings or put like a virtual barrier around that savings that comes through efficiency and make that go directly towards funding new building projects and ongoing maintenance. So since receiving that council support in May to take this direction, staff have advanced details of our funding strategy and the specific budget requests we'll be making as part of the 2025 budget process. So at this point, I'm going to pause and just stop here for council questions really around our facilities plan and our long-term financial strategy.
Thanks, Michelle. Council questions in this section? Mark? Matt?
Just a couple of questions. Have you estimated the capital cost, not merely of the 5 projects that are scheduled to be developed in the next 5 years, but of the entire transformation of our capital assets to meet our environmental goals? Do we have any sense of what we're looking at here?
We don't. We are starting to, we've been putting together sort of a decision matrix, if you will, really looking building by building at, you know, what are the capital improvements needed in each of those, and starting to kind of get more granular. We've prioritized a number of buildings that are kind of critical, if you will, in infrastructure needs. And so those are some of the initial projects you see. But the challenge with putting a total capital cost is it's so subject to timing and when you actually might build those projects. You know, escalation on building projects can be significant just a few years out. But it is our goal kind of in our next phase of working through our facilities plan, and the next steps is to get more specific on each building. Like, what is the plan? What do we need to do in this particular building? Is it just incremental adjustments to infrastructure to meet our goals, which is the case in some buildings, or in others, do we really need large renovations to meet those goals? So that's kind of the next steps past these current projects that we've identified as priorities.
Okay, because if I recall memo, those 5 projects we were talking about were about $280 million just for those, and it's got to be larger than that because it's $150 to $200 million estimate just for Alpine Balsam. So, you know, you're looking at probably what, $500 million for those 5 buildings, and then some untold number for the rest. And I think we have to work in the context of what the total program looks like, not doing it piecemeal and suddenly finding out we can't do the next 5 buildings. You know, we need to plan for this with the knowledge of what those commitments are going to be. My second question is, can you explain a little more about how the ring fencing of energy savings actually work? I mean, if your energy bill declines by 30%, do you assume that there's going to be some allocation of that amount from the general fund towards the facilities department? You know,
yeah. So what the ring fencing really is, and it's from both energy, but it's also operations and maintenance. So a number of the buildings that we're talking about consolidating, in our facilities plan, we assessed the ongoing operations and maintenance funding. And it was, at the time, I think it was like $11 a square foot, which was actually 2 times the industry standard for operating and maintaining buildings. It was around $5 a square foot that typically buildings are operated and maintained at. So there is savings inherent in just operating our buildings more efficiently. Right now, we're chasing failures. We're fixing things in emergency conditions. So we're paying a premium at doing that. So when we build a new building and out of the gates, we've got something that's well-oiled and operating well. In our current operating budget, we have money dedicated towards, you know, those existing buildings. We vacate them, and then we can redirect that funding towards those new buildings. And that's the idea of ring fencing those savings, if you will, and redirecting them towards operations and maintenance of those buildings.
So in effect, you're saying that those savings become a source of dedicated funding.
That's right.
And I raise that issue because we have, you know, issues with respect to the proliferation of dedicated funds for one purpose or another. And this appears to be a form of dedicated funding. Is that a mischaracterization?
Well, it is leveraging those savings in order to operate and maintain those new buildings. in a manner that we want to not kind of get us back into the state that we're at today, those savings could be leveraged in order to do that. And so that is, we are talking about putting kind of that fence around those savings so that they can be used essentially for the same purposes they are in buildings today, but not dispersed elsewhere.
Okay, I think that answers the question. It is kind of a form of dedicated funding. And please don't infer from that I'm thinking adversely about the program, because I'm very, very strong on proper maintenance of our capital assets. But this is a technique that to some extent, we were moving away from. I thought a very significant portion of our budget is now dedicated funding for one purpose or another, and this is piecing off yet another form of savings on a dedicated basis. So yeah, I think that's worth some further conversation, and I do look forward to your more complete detailing and estimation of what this program is going to cost us, because I think it is a number that is going to be breathtaking when we see it in full. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Then Lauren.
Thanks, Aaron. And Mark, I actually appreciate those questions because they are somewhat related to where I was going, which is thinking about like our bonding authority and how can we use our assets and leverage them to accelerate some of the work that we're trying to do. And so there were two places I was curious about is, can we borrow against some of these current assets that we have that are sitting there? And can that accelerate by borrowing against that, by issuing debt, more or less? Can that give us some money to then more urgently tackle and front load some of these projects so we have less risk later on? So that's a question I'm curious about. What's our bonding capacity? Do we have any overhead before we risk our bond rating? So that's something that I'm curious about. And then similarly is, especially when we're thinking about like these, our climate work on this is, could we borrow against, similarly using that bonding authority, could we borrow against the climate tax more or less and get money early to make those more rapid investments in that very important climate work that has urgency, right? That $5 million a year, we're kind of waiting a while for those coffers to build. Maybe we can borrow against that and get some accelerated work done. So that's something that I'm curious about is just, are those tools available to us? And if so, to what extent? And maybe if we do embark on them, do they create risk in other areas like our bond rating or other things? So that's what I'm just approaching approaching it the same way Mark was, but just maybe from a slightly different angle on how do we achieve the overall goal, which I think is important with our capital assets.
Yeah, those are great questions. I'm actually going to ask someone from our central finance to talk more specifically about our bonding capacity and maybe help address those. We have someone.
And I didn't mean to make Jonathan Cohen squirm in his chair by throwing out, issuing debt on that climate check. So I'm sorry, Jonathan.
I appreciate that, Michelle. I think you're trying to phone a friend here and like it.
Yeah.
So whether Charlotte or Mark, and I know Cara wanted to be here and is not feeling well, but if someone could assist, that would be really great.
Good evening, Council. Mark Wolf, Assistant City Manager. I'll have to put an old hat on briefly.
Pull you back in, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. We do have bonding capacity against the climate tax that was authorized by voters. I don't know that capacity off the top of my head, but that is a possibility if it's in alignment with the climate tax language. Borrowing is an option for this project, and Michelle will get into it in a little bit more detail. It is a policy choice whether or not we pursue a P3 or borrow for the project. And borrowing and the ongoing support of the debt service, that in essence is again, we're making that choice, and that amount of ongoing money we're using to pay the debt service is not available for other things. The ring fencing specifically gets at the ongoing operating and maintenance, which we wouldn't be borrowing for. There's an option to include that in a P3, which we'll outline in a moment. The ring fencing isn't a dedicated funding source per se. If we self-finance, whether we borrow, regardless of the source of funds we're borrowing against, that operating and maintenance would still be subject to annual council appropriation, which to Michelle's presentations in the memo, we haven't been great at over the decades. And so I think that's a big policy question to dive into, is not only whether or not we borrow for the capital side of things, but how we think about ultimately financing and budgeting for the ongoing operating and maintenance.
I appreciate that, Mark. It was a good response. So, I mean, I leave it to our trusty financial team to figure that out. I just want to make sure that those options are on the table and we consider them, given the urgency of some of this climate work and some of that dire nature of we need to accelerate that work on our facilities and other things. So, appreciate that.
Lauren?
Thank you. I appreciate those bigger picture framing or bigger picture questions that Mark and Matt both brought up. I have a couple of sort of questions more about some of the language we're using. On our graph where we talk about sort of building life cycle and end of life, as we think about sort of the usefulness of buildings, I would really like us to think about that as more maybe before it needs a major rehabilitation or something like that, because I mean, the reality is that often the structures of those buildings they could still serve a purpose, whether or not they can serve the purpose that we want them to effectively is the question. So, and also looking at that graph that was kind of around the cost of building maintenance over time, are there things that we're doing as we move forward to try and address that on the design side by making buildings that are easier to maintain over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So just on both your questions, so great points. So we are very much trying to adaptively reuse a lot of buildings, and I'll actually get into that with Alpine Balsam. And our team has done sort of extensive work now on multiple adaptive reuses, and at times recognized when some building forms are very challenging and when they're kind of cost prohibitive. But I would agree, our preference is to reuse a building before we try to tear it down and do something else. So I appreciate that that comment, and definitely wanted to take that approach. As far as your second question, you can remind me what you were just
as we look at these new projects, on the design side, are we making sure that we're asking for buildings that have lower maintenance costs over time as part of how we're dealing with those issues?
Yeah, thank you, was a key part of what we presented in our plan. Is right now, just kind of given the way we've evolved into this situation with sort of some underfunding in making critical infrastructure replacements and moving forward, we're in a very reactive state. So everything is kind of reacting to something's failing, and so it's coming at a high cost. One thing, just maintaining well in existing buildings, and when we build and put in new equipment, when we properly fund kind of infrastructure renewal and operations and maintenance, we can do more preventative and predictive maintenance. And so we extend the life of equipment. And that was one thing we actually presented in our plan in some graphs, and could walk through that in detail at some point. But before a piece of equipment fails, if we maintain it, it's like putting an oil change in your car. It's, getting ahead of that failure. It's before things rust. It's before things start to fall apart, that we can really extend the life of equipment, and we aren't responding to repairs. So that is the approach we want to take to reduce our costs, but also extend the equipment life.
Yeah, and my question was more about, as we look at designing buildings with new systems, ensuring that those new systems are systems that won't require as much maintenance, that we're taking into account the life cycle costs of the building ownership for the buildings that are being designed.
Yeah, I'll get into this a little bit more in a minute. And so it's an interesting balance, but really one challenge is as we drive towards really high performing energy efficient buildings, they're actually becoming even more and more complicated. They're more like really technical machines as they automate and they respond to their conditions. And I'll get into that a little bit more in the next slide. What we are trying to do and balance when we work with our engineers on new buildings is sometimes we can over-engineer buildings and make their systems very complicated. So we do balance looking at simple systems. But one thing that's really complex is all these systems now talk to each other, and they do that autonomously. And so it still really demands a high level of attention from an operations and maintenance team to keep that system running well. When it does, it's efficient, but it's not some way that we can kind of just peel back on looking at it.
Thank you. And then I also saw that number for the buildings that we're looking at letting go of as being 0.18% of acreage. I assume that that's including parks and open space.
I'd have to go back and look at it exactly, but I think excludes open space.
Okay.
So it includes parks, but excludes open space. But I could reconfirm where that number, the acreage there.
Yeah, I mean, I would just be interested in seeing it as a number that doesn't include parks or open space.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ryan?
Thanks, Michelle and Joanna, for your diligent work on this. I have two questions on, I guess, climate and energy strategy. I sent a hotline on this, again, it was just before the meeting, and I apologize for the late notice. But the first one is, I really enjoyed reading about the focus on energy analysis and having a climate compatible approach with the buildings. And when I think about a modern approach to energy and buildings, I think about land use and transportation that focuses on, or a transportation approach that focuses on accessibility. And this is a timely point for Boulder because our update from climate initiatives on December 14th pointed out that transportation and land use is one of the most pernicious problems that we continue to have with our need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so my question is, it feels to me in the reading of the proposal that there's a lot of focus on buildings inside the building relative to that on how people get to the buildings, how we might or might not induce demand. And I'm just wondering if you've given access or accessibility much thought with respect to the climate strategies. And I don't want to put you too much on the spot. So if the answer is we need to think about it more, that's fine. But I'd just love to hear you maybe just speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did get a response off to your questions, but I'm happy to share. I actually shared a diagram that I'm going to pull up now. So we have thought a lot about access. And let me see, is that back up there? So can we all see that screen? So, gosh, I think this was back in 2019. We did some analysis, particularly when we were just starting to really think about consolidation. So first, we have staff scattered and services scattered across the city. And one thing we commonly hear, both from community members trying to access services, but our staff, is they're getting in their car and they're driving from one place to the other place to another place to get something within the same day. We know our staff are doing it too. They're driving from one building to another to meet with different people. And so that's very inefficient. So consolidation and bringing all staff and services to one or two central locations that are easy to access and in places that provide multimodal transportation was something that we were thinking about. This little kind of high-level urban analysis, if you will, started to look at the location of Alpine Balsam, which had been purchased by the city, but noticing that, you know, this yellow is really highly residential, and it's where we know there's a lot of people living now, and it's on Broadway, which is a major, roadway through here. So this was one location to feel like centralization could help with that. And then the other, as we looked kind of out east, what were the opportunities? Because we can't fit everything at Alpine Balsam. we have a lot of other services and still other things to accommodate. We started to look at where the Boulder Valley Comp Plan was forecasting growth in the future. And that's in, the East Boulder area. So this is where we see people. But then we also looked at where staff were commuting from. And the current municipal service center, which is out on the Pearl Parkway extension there, is a property that the city already owns. It's a large amount of land there. It is sort of a way potentially to intercept a lot of people coming into the city and provide services out east before they may have to penetrate deeper into the city. So those are some of the things we are thinking about when we think about city services, especially with those two big consolidations. But even with smaller potential consolidations of services, thinking about where are they accessed? Are they easily accessed by many modes? So those are some of the things that we've included so far.
Thank you for that, Michelle, and thank you to you and the team for responding so quickly and coming up with the graphic, nevertheless. My second question, maybe I won't put it to you because you sort of got to it, but I asked if there was a thinking on transportation demand management, sort of in keeping with the high-performing aims of the program. My suspicion is you have time to kind of work this out, but I'll just maybe just leave it with the thought that, the government's own facilities here, with our facilities, we have such an opportunity to play a leadership role and show developers that are coming to us and providing TDM proposals that planning board and the transportation board are often saying you shall try again with. We have such an incredible opportunity to provide a role model. So if you feel free to respond to that, but otherwise I'll just leave it.
It is part of the work that we do whenever we develop a project. We do have to do transportation demand management studies on those projects. Alpine Balsam in particular is a very aggressive model with that. So I think in that particular project, we are leading the way in what we're trying to accomplish there.
Thanks a lot.
Tina and Mark, and we do have two more sections of this coming up as well.
Yeah, I just, and I think my comments probably relate more to the next section, but because Ryan brought up the location of the building, I'll follow up on it now. And I've had some concern about having the services on the very western edge of Boulder, given how we're dispersed and where employees are coming from. And so, given that we're doing two campuses, I just hope that we keep that in mind, that we might want to be thinking more about the central location. I don't know if we need two locations. The other piece is when we purchased this land, and given that this was reconsidered in 2019 at a meeting, and then the 2021 plan was also adopted, but one of the big changes after COVID is that the price of office space has gone down and the availability has gone up. So just when we think about the best use of our limited resources and trying just to contemplate, should we already be starting to load services in Central Boulder based on the location, the ease of its access across the community, and also some possible financial gains for the city. And the last piece is also just where do we put council chambers? And thinking about how the central part is more central for people who want to come in person. It's not that easy to get to the Alpine Balsam with our existing transportation. I know all of us have a shared goal of increasing that. It's actually where I live. And it's really hard to take a bus anywhere. You can go up and down Broadway all day, but that's about it. So those are just some considerations about access to council itself. And also forward thinking, how much do we invest in both sites versus one centralized site that's more accessible to our employees and probably our community. But those are just considerations and things that I've been thinking about when I'm thinking about Alpine Balsam in particular, and just the overall landscape of where city services are located. Thanks.
Mark?
Actually, some of Tina's questions are mirroring some thoughts of my own. Have we ever done a survey of staff to see what their preference is, where they would like to be located?
We have done some extensive engagement with staff, and there is interest between both but there is interest in the Eastern Campus, and actually for all the reasons that Tina just talked about, we also think that that Eastern site is a really great opportunity. Honestly, between both, neither one actually accommodates all of our services. We actually have quite a few services, but between the two, we do accommodate a large portion of services that could be centralized.
Okay, because I'm also beginning to have some concerns about the cost of the Alpine Balsam project, and you know, whether it is worthwhile for us to spend $200 million for that, as opposed to dedicating those funds to an eastern campus, where we own the land, and possibly, you know, looking at Alpine Balsam as an opportunity for very extensive and frankly even dense housing. And so I think there's some, you know, I hope there's some thought process going into this, that we're not just kind of going in lockstep down the road, because the expense of that project is just enormous. It's got to be the largest capital expenditure we've ever contemplated, and it's for an office building. So I'm hoping that you will continue to think about these things and consider the alternatives as we go forward, because we're talking about some enormous numbers. Thank you.
Aisha?
Thank you. Want to echo many or co-sign support many of the comments, and again, just really appreciative. Especially the comments around climate initiatives, the energy needs, the water needs. Really just thinking, you know, the city doesn't have a climate risk assessment, which is that longer term strategy piece. And I know that's something the climate office is really interested in. And so just curious about that intersection. Also just in general around community education around this type of, these types of decisions, because they are really so complex. And so how can we, you know, what is currently being provided when we're talking about these things to our larger community? Again, you know, again, how does the crosswalking the information we got from the survey, how does that then impact and inform this conversation that we're having? So again, I just wanted to lift that up, but in general, really excited to have some deeper thinking around this, more education around this. I don't know if there's an upcoming Friday lunch thing, if that's already on the list, but I would love to lift that up for continued conversations, you know, especially when we're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars. I think, you know, having some stronger additional training and education, I would definitely love to be a part of that. And then lastly, just the ecosystems approach. So again, you know, buildings are not an island. So how does this intersect not only with transportation, but some of the other considerations in addition to the city staff that needs to get there, but as Tina indicated, those in our city needing to get to certain facilities and where they're going to be located. So, and of course, accessibility for our peoples with disabilities, et cetera. But in general, I'm just really interested in how we're going to be innovating, and even just like the kind of cement we're using in these buildings, you know what I mean? Like, I just, yeah, I'm eager, but ultimately I'm really deferring to many of my colleagues right now as I'm onboarding significantly in this area. So thank you.
Great. Well, seeing no other hands, how about we go on to the second phase of the presentation?
Great. Thank you. These are great comments, and we're excited to share more too and address a lot of the feedback. So thank you for the feedback so far. Let me go back to sharing.
And Michelle, you are being occasionally a little hard to understand, so I don't know if you...
Sorry about that. He always seems to assume it doesn't pick up well. I'll move in. Okay, so the next initiative, we will go a little bit deeper into that key initiative of maintain well and talk about it as a climate and resiliency strategy. And I'll also talk about these key projects, including Alpine Balsam, in a little bit more detail, but some other projects we're advancing in 2024. So with the Maintain Well Key initiative, again, we're going to focus here specifically, on how it impacts achieving our climate action targets and decarbonizing our building stock. So we really are looking at this as it is an energy story. Our built environment is responsible for nearly half of our total global emissions, and most of that comes from building operations once they're built. It comes largely from ongoing heating, cooling, and ventilation loads, from lighting and something we call plug loads, which is anything that you plug into the wall or into an electrical outlet. And in new high-performing buildings, there are great ways of reducing the impact of these loads and gaining energy efficiency, but they do come with ongoing monitoring, fine-tuning, and constant adjustment. So this ongoing attention to our systems and infrastructure and maintaining our buildings well, it does become a carbon reduction strategy. So now just addressing a little bit more how we look at and what we're looking at with our high performing buildings, which are what we are building when we build these new projects. They are complex, they are highly integrated machines, and they are becoming more and more capable of autonomous decision making. I think many of you probably control some aspect of your home from a phone, whether it's a doorbell to see if a package has arrived and it's still there on your doorstep, or you can turn the heat on before you leave for your house. Our commercial buildings are doing the same thing, but at a much larger scale and to accommodate the needs of a lot more people all at once. They rely on a network of sensors all over the building that read local conditions, like if a window is left open or if a room is left vacant, and then they trigger actuators and dampers and valves and all sorts of things accordingly to help adjust and close and operate those parts to maximize energy efficiency. And they are becoming smarter and smarter. They can actually forecast weather data and make decisions on how to adjust equipment. They can shave demand loads by understanding if the afternoon is forecasted to be hot. And so that list of complexities goes on in how buildings are responding to their microenvironments in an ongoing way. So the industry is acknowledging this increased complexity with this need for an extended transition to operations period as construction completes and as we occupy buildings. And this process is critical in identifying and pre-planning preventative maintenance that must be performed to achieve ongoing zero energy performance. So this kind of leads into another concept our team is working with, and that is the concept of zero over time. So first, in the case of high-performing buildings that we just built, following that initial transition in operations, we have to continue investing in that preventative maintenance to preserve those zero energy targets and maintain that initial zero energy over time. But there is another way that our team is looking at this in buildings that aren't necessarily like front in line for big energy retrofits or renovations or replacements. We are still working to transition those buildings in an energy efficient way and convert to all electric, but we may do that more gradually, piece by piece. So as a specific piece of equipment fails, when we make a replacement, we will make an effort to replace it with an all-electric piece of equipment that's highly energy efficient. But it's incrementally moving us towards our energy goals in a lot of those buildings. This approach does cost a little bit more than just business as usual, which is making simple like-for-like replacements, but those don't get us towards meeting our energy goals. Our facilities team is working in partnership with Central Finance on these strategies to bring forward funding requests for major capital projects, but we're also coming with a funding plan on the heels of that for the proper operations and maintenance of projects once they're constructed. And these are strategies that we're developing more through 2025 budget process. So now looking at those major investments that we've been talking about, since 2015 or from 2015 up until currently, we have invested about $37 million on 4 buildings, which was following a period of little to no investment from the 1990s until then. And we are now planning to spend about $280 million more by the end of this decade on these projects on the right-hand side. So that large jump in numbers is indicative of 2 key things. One is There is a lot more square footage in the projects that we're proposing that are kind of quote unquote on deck, and also a lot more infrastructure involved in those projects. But this is also what you're seeing is the cost of escalation on building projects from, a decade ago to now. The cost of building has rapidly increased. But another key point of this slide is that upfront construction costs are actually just about 10% of the total cost of owning and operating buildings. So for these 9 buildings, the total cost of operations over some 30-year period of time, which is a typical lifespan of a building, although we would expect our buildings to last much longer, but that's in the neighborhood of $3 billion. So operating and maintaining these buildings properly or not has major swings in that total cost of ownership. And when we don't operate them well, we lose the value of those original upfront investments. So now we're looking at some of the major capital projects we're advancing in 2024, starting with the replacement of 2 fire stations. The capital construction of these 2 projects is funded by the Community Culture Resilience and Safety Fund. We are currently looking for sites, and once we acquire them, we will promptly begin designing construction on these stations. It is likely one or both would go in front of planning board sometime in 2025 and would be a council call-up option. And we would anticipate construction to be complete on each of these stations before 2030. Our fire stations are kind of small in square footage, each one of them, but they actually have a pretty high energy use intensity. So these 2 new stations, along with the Fire Station 3 being completed this year, they'll be all electric and they will be high performing buildings. So as we are looking to address our fire stations, we look at them more as a total system to reduce energy consumption and increase efficiency across all the stations by, as we make these improvements, trying to align our mechanical and our electrical and other systems and buildings. In this way, we drive efficiency in buildings across that system, and we can look again to redirect those financial savings back into ongoing maintenance to support the recommended funding levels we're making in buildings. So those are those blocks, those orange blocks I talked about in that financial strategy, again, looking for efficiency here to help drive operations and maintenance in new buildings. When these new stations are built with the same type of equipment, using the same types of filters and sets of commands, we can drive, again, that efficiency and that savings in their ongoing preventative maintenance and start to take advantage of economy of scale in maintaining like pieces of equipment. So the renovation of the East Boulder Community Center will advance in 2024 with funding also largely made available through the CCRS fund. The renovation will modernize the facility to improve the community's experience and stay competitive with the surrounding area. We'll also have the opportunity to address much needed improvements for access and inclusion to many areas of the center. And a major focus will be on the natatorium and pool area with major enhancements planned there. So less visible with these centers, but equally important, is the deep energy retrofit that will also be part of the East Boulder Community Center renovation project. The three recreation centers make up a third of our annual energy consumption across our entire building portfolio, excluding only our treatment plants. So as we work on the renovations at East, we are examining the programming and the services across all 3 centers, and that'll take place. And we'll also address the infrastructure needs at the other centers to develop an efficient and effective approach to proposed projects that are going to be needed at those locations in the coming years. So here again, we are thinking about our recreation centers as a system with similar components and equipment and systems to help drive efficiency across all 3 centers as we make a lot of infrastructure improvements. So now we'll look at the Western City Campus. Development of the Western City Campus at Alpine Balsam makes some significant advancements in our key initiatives to consolidate services, and we'll look to achieve a lot of the outcomes I identified earlier by designing modern, high-performing buildings. In 2024, we are going to start infrastructure improvements on the site. That'll include flood improvements in a new greenway along Balsam. road improvements on Broadway, 9th, and Balsam and Alpine. We'll also start the construction of the new 11th Street that is going to cut through the site, and then some underground utility work. We do anticipate coming before Planning Board in the second quarter of this year. We have made form-based code and site review submissions that will go to Planning Board at that time. We are expecting to go into construction on the Western City campus in 2025 and have that completed sometime in 2027. So our work on Alpine Balsam has already provided a success story when it comes to preserved embodied energy. Carbon emissions from buildings is really broken into two key categories. Upfront carbon, which is that which is associated with the materials and the transportation of materials and what it takes to build a project up front, and then operational carbon, which is what it takes to heat and cool a building and operate over its lifetime. At Alpine Balsam, we have been leading the way on a low carbon redevelopment. In 2018, we made an adaptive reuse of the Brenton building. We converted this sort of, at the time, an energy hog into the city's first all-electric, highly energy efficient building. And we reused the existing concrete structure, concrete being one of the main contributors to embodied carbon. And then we also completed the sustainable deconstruction of the hospital, which was another great approach to preserving embodied carbon. It was predominantly through directly reusing the steel from the hospital on our new construction projects like Fire Station 3. You can actually see the steel from the hospital in the engine apparatus bays. And then we crushed a lot of the remaining concrete and brick from the structure directly back into the hole on site, which helped avoid a lot of transportation emissions from taking the material away and bringing new material back. The whole development will make use of 3 existing buildings out of the 4 that were purchased on the site. When the hospital was taken down, it found new homes directly in the ground or in new construction, and this has been evidenced by the 94% diversion rate we have achieved on this project. At the end of the construction of the Western City campus, we will complete a full life cycle assessment up to this point that captures that preserved upfront carbon on this redevelopment and compare that to traditional redevelopments. But the next step, once we occupy these buildings, is to continue to achieve those carbon reduction goals and minimize operational carbon by maintaining the buildings well. And so I will pause again at the end of this section to just see if council has questions and feedback on the projects that we're doing and some of the sustainability aspects of the maintain well.
Thanks for that, Michelle. I've got Taisha's hand up and then Tina. No?
I think that's from before and I just didn't lower it. My apologies.
Oh, okay, no worries. Tina.
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining the process. And I think it's just awesome how you're able to meet these environmental goals in the deconstruction of the building. And a lot of those efficiencies are exciting. And also just, my experience on school board, we did, as you're probably pretty aware of, some large bonds, and we created a lot of cost savings through efficiencies in operations. It's never a really exciting topic to talk about HVAC and materials, but it's incredibly important. So I'm very supportive of this work. The one small question I had is, when we design the buildings, are we designing them for for people being in the office 5 days a week, or did we make adjustments as our working structure has changed and we've become more flexible in how and where people work? Were there any impacts to that? Thank you.
Yeah, there were huge impacts. So when we started this project, back in the end of 2015 when the site was purchased, and we were first assessing reuse of the pavilion building for city staff and consolidating of services. I think we expected at the time being able to consolidate 4, maybe 5 kind of current city buildings or staff from those buildings to the campus. And now we are looking at being able to consolidate upwards of 10. We're still kind of looking at that map. The challenge is back before COVID, when people were in the office 5 days a week, it was like simple addition and subtraction, 1 person, 1 desk. Now it's like complicated calculus, trying to figure out, you know, how people use desks and spaces, and really understanding how to create a supportive, productive work environment, but also the flexibility that people can come and go from desks. So it's involved a tremendous amount of internal engagement with staff, with departments, with directors to really understand the values we're trying to achieve here, how we're trying to serve our community, and what that looks like for staff coming to the site. But the long story short is we have readjusted greatly to be really efficient with how this building is used to support more staff and really bring most departments together to work more efficiently together.
I'll just chime in with a comment, which is that I really enjoyed that the report about the sustainable deconstruction of the building. So impressive, and the way that we're reusing the old steel for the new fire station is a story I tell all the time, and people really love to hear that about how we're not just reusing it, but we're reusing it close to home and even within the same city organization, and saving ourselves money in the process. So just amazingly well done there. All right.
Thanks. Yeah, the rehabilitation that was done on the Brenton building is so amazing. And I also appreciated that study and looking at kind of the hospital building and the deconstruction. I do just want to, for full transparency, point out that, you know, we're not saving the total embodied energy of that building, right? By taking concrete and crushing it up. That doesn't mean we can have an equivalent a building again for no environmental impact, right? The Portland cement, the part that sticks the concrete together, that is the most taxing part of that. You know, we turned concrete into gravel, which is, it's great that we filled the hole. We didn't need to transport it. I love all of that, but I think that it also you know, isn't saving as much as an adaptive reuse of that building would have. And I understand that there's reasons that we couldn't do that there, but just, yeah. I did also want to touch a little bit on the energy use and because you were talking about how technical some of the systems are in sort of these high efficiency buildings. And while that can be true, I think we also need to make sure that we are designing them in such a way that they work fairly passively as well, because that's a big part of resilience, right? If we need these buildings to be places of community gathering in times of emergency, having them being able to function relatively well, even when they don't have power and things like that, is an important piece of building our community to be more resilient. And so I would caution us in relying too heavily on very highly technical building control systems, because I think that there are ways to do sustainable buildings without that, or to not rely as heavily on those portions. And I think that that should definitely be part of what we're considering. I would also really like to see these buildings going to the design advisory board. I didn't see sort of any of them being flagged for that. And since we have a board that is largely design professionals, I think that would be useful. Especially because it's a city project and they are design professionals. I think that these could go in front of them at relatively early stages so that we don't need to lengthen the entire process. But I think that would be an important step as well. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
If I can just, great comments, and thank you for the feedback and agree. One thing just to emphasize, you're absolutely right with the passive strategies first. I will say, just like in the Brenton building, one of the first priorities we bring is to making really sound building envelopes and ensuring that our buildings are tight. We noticed actually through some power outages In particular, the Brenton building performed better than all of our other buildings in being able to sustain temperatures. And so I just couldn't agree more. Passive strategies are kind of first and foremost, but then we come in with this layer of some active strategies on top. But appreciate the comments. Thank you.
Great. Well, not seeing any other hands, we can take us to our third and last section, Michelle.
Okay, in this last section, we want to talk about the work that we've been doing and share on our public-private partnerships to help our city maintain our buildings well for all the reasons I've been talking about. So the concept of a P3 was first brought up in our facilities plan, and since that time, we've continued to explore it in much greater detail on the specific projects we're advancing now. The city has done P3s in the past, so it's not entirely new, but this structure with buildings would be unique, and it is a significant undertaking, especially with the cost and the complexity that we've been discussing. To support this effort, our staff team has brought on Ernst & Young infrastructure advisors. They have a depth of experience helping organizations and municipalities across the country, including in Colorado and locally in Denver, to help establish P3 partnerships. The general structure that we have landed on is what's shown here on the slide. So the city would hold a contract with a prime developer to design, build, finance, operate, and maintain a building or a set of buildings. In this structure, the prime developer then has a debt equity partner and then holds separate contracts with upfront design build teams and then longer term operators of the building. And I also want to address the great question that was brought up by Councilmember Wallach over hotline with the ownership of assets under a P3, just to be clear about the structure that the city is pursuing there. In this arrangement, the city would maintain full ownership of our public buildings and properties, and this is a common arrangement with public agencies. The partner would not hold a lien or rights over the facilities, and if the contract was terminated by default for the city, the partner would be due compensation, but would still not have any rights of ownership over those properties. So what this really is, and what we've come to really understand a good P3 is today, is a strong relationship between the city and a strategic partner who can help us maximize our goals and investments. It is an opportunity to establish standards of quality, performance, and create a framework for measuring success across all of our buildings to achieve our environmental and social goals and lower our total cost of ownership. Through performance guarantees that would be part of a contractual relationship, we can ensure a higher degree of reliability in our buildings, greater predictability in our budgeting, and this reduced risk of emergencies. Some of the key challenges with entering a P3 surround just the complexity of the relationship itself. These contracts are long, they're highly detailed. It's a process to get through the negotiations and then to manage the contracts once they're in place. And these P3s also come with a higher cost of capital. However, those costs can be overcome through efficient operations and maintenance that typically a P3 will see as compared to how the city has historically performed on its own. We are doing that comparison as we evaluate the P3. Our exploration of a P3 over the summer involved direct discussion with the private markets. So we went and talked to developers, contractors, operators in the industry who would be proposers on a formal request. Again, in the summer, we asked for their feedback on the structure that we're proposing and the details of what we're thinking. And generally in the bullets here show kind of the specific areas we touched on in helping to shape our next steps in the procurement and our overall approach. In many places, we found alignment between what the city is looking for and what a P3 or a partner would want to achieve as well. So there was some good alignment. Most of all, there was a lot of alignment around values. Today, the private sector is equally focused on achieving environmental and social goals. And they actually have a depth of ways that they've already been accomplishing this on projects, how they've been measuring success, and how they have tied that to performance guarantees. Private investors are also equally interested in developing a good relationship and a partnership. So we are not really proposing just like handing over our buildings and then walking away. This really is an integrated day-to-day collaboration between the partner and ourselves to execute, operate, and maintain our buildings together. They emphasize that importance is a relationship in this ongoing partnership as much as we were. And then in this good relationship, these industry partners, they can help us access additional resources more efficiently, help us pursue other sources of funding, like in big grants, and they can provide a lot of economy of scale. So we have identified sort of an initial scope of projects that would be included in an initial offering to the private market to propose on. In the first phase, we would offer the Western City campus, the East Boulder Community Center renovation, and at least one of the fire station replacements. Following a demonstrated success of the partnership and this way of implementing and maintaining building projects, we've identified additional projects that could be considered for inclusion, which could be more work on the recreation centers and the development of the proposed Eastern City campus. The structure of the overall agreement, kind of at a high level, would include the total costs for both the construction and the ongoing operation and maintenance for that phase one project over whatever term is agreed upon, whether that's 20, 25, or 30 years. Would also define an availability payment, which is kind of the amount of money that the city can make available on an ongoing annual basis. The partner would actually help us quantify that. So as they help design alongside with us and look at systems, and they help identify the types of efficiencies that can be achieved, they help us develop what could be that availability payment within our budgets. They make performance guarantees, which could include incentives for exceeding performance, but it would also include penalties if they're not meeting our standards. And there is a mechanism for incorporating future scopes. It would also include, and they're very used to, open book pricing. So really having an open, very transparent pricing index on overhead, soft costs, and then also a process for including local competitive subcontracts. So again, all these elements we discussed directly with developers and their standards in a P3 approach today. So at this point, we are preparing a formal request for qualifications, and we're planning to release that sometime in February. We would then shortlist candidates from what we receive and issue a request for proposals by the spring, where we ask candidates to detail their financial and technical approach to these projects and partnerships. And while these two steps are happening, staff are completing our own assessment of how we would self-perform this work. So that is how we would traditionally go about constructing and maintaining the projects and how we would fund this on our own, so that we can draw a kind of a comparison to understand and weigh the pros and cons of the city self-performing against the proposals that we receive from the P3. At that stage, after the RFP, this would technically conclude what we call our exploratory work on the P3. And we would do a final kind of thorough analysis of what we've received, and we would formulate a recommendation to council on whether or not we should proceed into a P3 relationship. And this would be a key no-go or go-no-go decision point with council. So should council decide to proceed and advance with a preferred partner, that partner would then become integrated into our design processes and with our consultant teams. They would help us finalize project designs and engineering so that they can come up with that gross maximum price and that guarantee on both the upfront construction as well as the long-term operations and maintenance of the project. Once they develop that GMP on those pieces, that would again be another opportunity. It's kind of late into the entire process, but it is another opportunity to for a council decision point to move forward with that project or to continue to go a more traditional route. So we did provide a lot more information and details in the memo on some of those contractual phases and some of the process in those supporting attachments, but this is where we are at today in that exploratory phase and the work we've been doing in a private partnership. And so that is sort of what's our last section. And then sort of two counselor questions we have is just questions and feedbacks on the work, the exploratory work in general, but also wanting to understand if there's additional information that could help council in forming a future decision on this.
Okay, thanks again, Michelle. So council questions, any additional information you'd like to get for future decision-making opportunities? I got Tina, Nicole, and Mark.
Yeah, thank you so much for helping me understand. I'm not sure if I'm entirely there yet. This is a new concept for me, so I'm not a financial expert, so I'm going to do my best. Just the first question is in the package you described, you included both of the fire stations, and I also felt like I heard that those could be paid for through the CRS tax. Did I hear that correctly, or are they being treated separately or in the same grouping?
They are funded. So both those and the rec center, the upfront capital construction is funded through the CCRS fund. In a P3, the city does bring funding to the table. What could be an advantage and what we're exploring and we would like to hear from the P3 is how they may help operate and perform the ongoing operations and maintenance in maybe a more effective way than the city could on its own that would help drive kind of cost efficiency over the long term. So they would still help us build those projects. We would bring that funding to the table, but they would also perform the operations and maintenance of those projects over a term.
Okay, so then, and then when you put out the price or describe the price of for instance, the Western campus at 168 million, does that include, is that just the construction cost, or is that the cost of construction plus maintenance over a time period? What is that?
That is the costs that have been incurred in the future costs. It's the capital construction costs, and that includes infrastructure. So it's not just the buildings, it is a large amount of infrastructure across the site that supports both the housing and the Western City campus. A large portion is then the Western City campus itself, but that is not the operations and maintenance.
Okay, so when we do the comparison, that'll be separate from the capital.
Yeah,
we do a
we are
side by side.
modeling the operations and maintenance for the Western City campus as part of kind of our comparison. So that'll be a new number we'll be bringing forward.
Okay, thank you so much.
Nicole, Mark, and Lauren.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the presentation and all this information. So I think what I'm most curious about, and I'm just lumping these third and fourth questions together because they are very tied together for me. In terms of the company values, I know talked in the memo about finding companies whose values are aligned with our city values. And I think, I think that's going to be something that I'm just sort of interested in, and that would inform a future decision for me. And I think my more immediate question is, how are we assessing that? Like, how are we kind of going in and looking at that? Are we looking at, where, if it's for-profit company, where are they getting their money from? Where are their investments going? Those kinds of things. But I'm also really interested in, just from an employee perspective for these companies, are they using union labor, for example? Are they paying fair wages? Are they do their employees or the people that they have working on projects, are the benefits that they're receiving comparable to the benefits that city employees receive, right? How are we just sort of assessing that we're a fit in that regard? And I think a sort of separate question, and I understand you may not have answers to those right now, that's why it's sort of a 3 and 4 together. These are the things that would inform a decision. The other is whether the joint disparity study that we're doing with the county may inform some of this work in thinking about partnerships and looking for, groups that are led by or, have very heavy involvement from underrepresented and, women, underrepresented minorities in the kind of business space. Thank you.
They're great pieces to include as we've developed that RFQ, I think, to ask for those requirements. So I appreciate the feedback. I think we'll move forward with those.
Mark and Lauren.
Yeah, let me just understand something about what we're talking about with the firehouse, for instance. We're talking about reducing our financial commitment under the CCRS, but still providing some capital under CCRS towards our obligations in a P3 arrangement. Is that correct?
No, we would be bringing the capital forward. So the P3, really, I think the financial advantage with the P3 is potentially their ability to operate and maintain these projects over the long term and help with funding and help with the systems-wide approach of maintaining a system of fire stations in a really efficient way. We would be bringing the capital that's been identified through the CCRS funds to the projects.
But we would not be doing that with respect to Alpine Balsam, would we? We don't have that
We are
degree.
we are by and large bringing the capital. We have identified the capital for all of these projects. We are looking to the P3 to potentially leverage efficiencies and savings to help with ongoing operations and maintenance and help drive some capital costs down. But the city has identified by and large upfront capital, which is necessary to bring to a P3. They don't just sort of generate the capital themselves. So these projects, all three of the projects, have identified city funding sources.
What would be the identity of the funding source for the $168 million for Alpine Balsam?
Well, we have identified sources in the general fund, but we've also been looking at the different departments and the ways that they would be going in there to build kind of a total package of funding. But that is something that we're working with central finance and that we will be bringing forward in the 2025 budget process, is that full funding strategy. But we have been working as a team to identify how this project would be fully funded if the city chose to self-perform.
Okay, and given the complexity of these arrangements and the process moving forward, I would ask that you communicate with us on a periodic basis, not simply at the end of the movie with a 300-page packet. If you get an analysis from a P3 partner, it would be interesting to know early what they are proposing, how we view it, whether some of Nicole's questions can be answered at the outset as opposed to, at the end of the movie. And so more information early is going to be very useful for us, especially given the degree of complexity of what we're looking at here. And I'm saying that as somebody who made a living in the real estate field and real estate development. This is not easy stuff, and trying to do it on 2 weeks notice with a 350-page packet is just not realistic for us. So periodic updates and transitional memos, I think, will be very, very useful to us, and I hope you will be willing to provide that.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks. So the public-private partnerships, the private section of that, right? Private companies, they are always in this for the profit. So there intrinsically is going to be an additional cost over what it would cost the city to self-perform the same work, because this company is profiting off of this contract, presumably, or else they're going bankrupt.
No, that's right. Yeah. That's correct.
So to me, it seems like the main reason, a lot of in my experience, the efficiencies from these often stem from the kind of experience they bring to the table and the choices that they make to increase efficiency. I think so in order for me to feel comfortable with making a choice like this, I think I would really need to understand what kind of experience they're bringing that we think the city really needs. Because we're essentially paying for some kind of information that we don't have or that would be challenging for us to acquire other ways. So yeah, I think that's the main thing that I want to understand a little bit better before I would feel comfortable with going that direction. Also, because one of the downsides that I see is that as electeds, I feel like it limits our accountability. If something is problematic, there is a less direct connection between the public and sort of who's responsible for this and how we get it fixed right away. Having an outsourced contractor responsible. And I've seen that with some of the other contracts that we have with the city and some of the difficulties or frustrations that I've seen from the public. So how we address those two things are things I would be interested to understand better. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you again, Michelle. I have two questions. Well, I guess I will give you two questions because your question was, what questions do we have? So my first question is, I don't know if I missed this, but just in a general sense, we're being asked, are we interested in pursuing a P3? And I don't have in my mind a clear sort of ledger of like, here's scenario A with the P3 and here's scenario B without it. And then here's sort of like the pros and cons or however to think about that. Maybe that comes later, but I think that will help to understand, for us to understand what, if we say no, like so what does that leave us with? So I guess that's for future, just sort of the framing that I think I'll need.
Yeah, I think we do plan to bring that more side by side comparison, and are continuing to pursue a route and have the option to self-perform if for some reason we all do decide that's not the right way to go. So
great. Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Second question, and this is picking up on our earlier discussion about transportation and accessibility. This kind of straddles maybe the first question and this one. But as I was listening to the different people talk, I was suddenly realizing that I should be more deliberately say that, you know, part of my vision for this reimagination is when somebody looks for employment at the city of Boulder and they're trying to decide, should I go work for the city, that they can imagine doing it without owning a car. That they can imagine, if it's whether they live in Longmont or Louisville or Boulder or whatever, that it's really transit connected. And also if they have a disability and are going to be walking there or moving however there with kids, that they really have a good network of protected and convenient ways to get there outside of a motor vehicle, and that this is a gold standard. And similarly, that the public, you know, when the public says, I need to go pay a visit to the office, and they look on Google Maps, that like transit is competitive and getting there. So my thought is on the question of the P3, can you imagine the scope of the P3 to include a consideration around this, around providing, it could be both on the design side, if maybe we have this in-house, but you know, there's just a tremendous amount of value to be unlocked in not having to build parking if you can make the transportation alternatives work well. But then also on the actual operations side, I don't want to suppose that we would need like a special private transit service, but some consideration of transportation, ensuring that there's good transportation options for employees. And we're really providing the gold standard for accessibility in a new facilities development. So my question is basically, can you imagine the scope of the P3 to include this?
yeah, I think we can think a little bit about that and how that becomes part of some of the performance standards. And frankly, I mean, that's one thing when we've been talking with the market. One thing that they've brought is they have their own innovations that, you know, and so I think we can ask more around that for sure.
Great, thanks so much.
Matt?
I see Taisha's hand in front of me on the queue, so I just want to
You're totally right,
verify
Taisha.
that.
I apologize. I missed you there. Taisha and then Matt, please.
No worries. Thank you so much, Matt. So I just want to again echo and appreciate Ryan, the reminder of the question that we are being asked. So thank you so much for that. And to that, I am certainly weary of a private partnership that continues to lean on the private side as far as those benefits. I feel like our city has constantly invested in these private public partnerships and gotten the raw side of the deal. To Lauren's earlier point and question, what are the driving incentives of these companies? And unfortunately, many of them are not using an ESG or B Lab or social benefits of those kinds of things. And so again, I just really want to honor. I also appreciated Nicole's comments around the Boulder County study and vendor selection. I'm also thinking about subcontracting as well. There is significant money being made through the private partnerships, and unfortunately, the lion's share of that continues to be with those who have historically benefited from inequitable systems. And so, therefore, I'm very interested in continuing that conversation and am eager to see those types of innovative strategies leveraged in this work, so that the lion's share is the public good, since we are taking the biggest risks on the front end and often have gotten the shortest lever of the stick. Want to make sure if there's anything else. Also, unfortunately, and I mean this with so much love in our heart, our climate goals unfortunately, are not aligned with the best available science data, right? Because it's aligned with what we are capable of doing together. Right? That's not, unfortunately, always the same thing as what our climate experts have to say. I often tickle or cry at some of the misalignments between what a sustainability office would say a climate initiative or metric of success should be versus what, quite frankly, all of us, all the stakeholder groups need to agree on. And I think one powerful example of that can be seen through the conversations that we're having around minimum wage, right? So again, I have no illusions around the complexity of these issues, but again, I want to lift this up because even our talk with net zero, is not as aggressive as we need to be. And so again, how are we moving beyond net zero in the work that we're doing as well? And so thank you again for these opportunities. This is also a growth area for me. And so I'm eager for continued learning opportunities, and I really appreciate the expertise of fellow council members and staff to help shape this very, very important and critical issue. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up biodiversity, wildlife corridors, all of these things. I'm not hearing any of the impacts of what's going to happen beyond humans. And unfortunately, I don't take a human first or human only perspective. So I'm always going to be curious of what are the implications of wildlife, of our urban canopy. I know, or urban forestry, especially in the areas that we're considering for Area 3 and other areas. Again, I think that we have unfortunately a perception versus reality issue with our biodiversity because we are so nature rich in so many of our areas. But I go back to that photo that we had of the slide of who lives in our city, and when I look at that eastern component or the eastern section of our city, it is not as green and robust as the western parts of our city. So that is also a consideration that I'm eager to hear more about. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Aaron. I just want to, two things. With public partnerships, I get the concern about the motives that profit drives on some of that, but the flip side is it's also driving economic vitality for an entire different wing of individuals and groups who otherwise might not receive that if we don't enter into that. I mean, it's the whole. That's why government-funded projects are such strong economic drivers in across the board. So I just want to make sure that as much as we have concerns, we also do understand the benefits that those have economically through our community and beyond. I just want to give a plus to what Ryan was bringing up with regards to the gold standard, because I think that's something that gets lost, and maybe that also ties into what Taisha was saying, which is there's what we can do and there's what maybe we should be doing, and they're not the same thing. And you know, certainly with regards to our facilities and how we think of connectivity, yeah, I mean, we're Boulder, and there's a part of that reputation that has preceded us that we could live up to by being that gold standard for all, to have that experience, but also be that example for others, whether it's our buildings or our connectivity. So you know, it comes at a cost, but I challenge us to what can we do that's the best on the front range. I mean, it can be something small, but that's a step than just what can we do that's just better than what we have been doing. So it might be semantics, but it's important because it sets a tone and sets us on a course to incrementally always one-upping ourselves, but also our sister cities, which is a healthy competition when you think about it. So anyway, so I just want to one-up that with what Ryan was saying, and plug where Taisha was going with that.
Great, and I'll call on myself here. I just think my colleagues have made some really excellent comments and points, so really appreciate that and echo those. I just want to particularly second what Nicole first brought up, that if we're going to work with a public-private partnership, that we need to make sure that it's living up to the values of our city and of our community, our city organization, and that everyone involved would be well treated, well compensated, in alignment with how we would treat our and compensate our own employees, and positive work environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it sounds promising, potentially financially, but has to live up to our values as an organization and as a city. With that said, I don't see any other hands up. So I think we can conclude this and just say, Michelle, that was incredibly well done, very detailed information, extremely well presented, great answers, and Joanna as well. You all do an amazing job on all of this very complicated stuff. So thanks so much.
And we so appreciate, obviously, and we've been taking lots of notes, and I know answering some questions in the moment, and really appreciate, I know there were some deeper questions, deeper conversations, and happy to continue to follow up. I know we reached out and offered some tours of the Alpine Balsam Western City Campus site, and happy to follow up with more details about that, and also figure out how to respond to some of the more deeper conversations. One point on the engagement piece that may have gotten kind of probably lost in the shuffle because it's happened over many years, but we actually started the Alpine Balsam conversation as part of the vision plan, and then it went into an area plan, and so we had lots of engagement and conversation. So I'm happy to reference back to some of that information if folks are interested in that, and also the point about our part of government, our civic part, and actually that was something council did weigh in on in terms of wanting to make sure the seat of government remained where it is in terms of the downtown. So again, great conversation, really appreciate it. And I know we took a bunch of time tonight, and really thank you again.
Yeah, appreciate all the feedback. This was great. Very helpful. Thank you.
Excellent. So you did get everything you need? No follow-up questions? Okay, great. It's good to hear. All right. Well, with that, if we can go to our next matter, please, Alicia.
All right, sir. Thank you. Our next matter is item 5C, under matters from the city manager, and it is the update on cold weather preparedness.
And I understand we have hot news on cold weather preparedness. Email came through. Nuri, you want to talk to us about that?
I don't know if you're trying to take Matt's dad jokes from him. Hot news on the cold front.
And not to trivialize the challenge of the cold weather, but we have good news on this front.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mayor. And I really want to appreciate council and the community interest in how we're addressing the upcoming cold weather for our unhoused community. It really is something that it lives in our minds. We think about it. We know you do too. And we just appreciate the highlighting of what we're doing. Please know that staff and our incredible partners out of county have been working on this for a while. since we first started hearing about the severe weather potentially coming our way. And there are protocols that we follow as we go through that effort. Earlier this week, we implemented our cold weather protocols across the city and the county. This included a change to operations at the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless, which expands its bed capacity by 20 additional beds and waives any nighttime stay limits for standby clients. In addition to overnight sheltering options, the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless will also remain open during the day for individuals to be able to stay within the facility when critical conditions like this are forecast. Transportation to and from downtown and the Boulder Shelter is provided for free every day, and I know they continue to see if that can be augmented as we move forward. Our city and county staff, along with our Office of Disaster Management, which deserves a great shout out as they help us when we take on these endeavors, they've continued to coordinate and communicate through regular and daily conversations to monitor conditions. And when I say daily, I mean sometimes multiple times in a day, because weather conditions change. We've also continued to monitoring that changing forecast and have been talking with our partners at the National Weather Service. Based on those latest forecasts, as of this afternoon, we understand that weather conditions for this weekend appear to be continuing to decline, with wind chill temperatures reaching from 0 to -20 below. Well, the last few days we anticipated, the last few days we had anticipated 2 days of extreme temperatures. The forecast was changing. It was frankly hot off the presses this afternoon when we were talking with ODM. And we believe those extreme temperatures are going to carry us out over the 4-day period. The National Weather Service has issued a wind chill warning from Saturday afternoon through Tuesday morning, and we believe that has now gone into Friday. As a result, our HHS staff and countywide partners have implemented the next step of our protocols, which is to open an additional emergency warming shelter at the East Boulder Agewell Center. We're utilizing the operational capacity support through our Office of Disaster Management and Emergency Operations Center. There's a lot, as you can imagine, of logistics as we're thinking about these decisions. And it is one of the reasons we take time and care to make sure that we've got those in place before announcing where we're going to be and what we're going to do, from mats to food to bathrooms to specialist support to security and more. The team has been and continues working on all of that as we speak. And appreciate those that are actually way into the night continuing to work on that as we're meeting. We're currently working to staff this emergency shelter from Friday night to Tuesday morning, dependent on finalization of logistics. And I'm happy to report that I believe that our staffing and resourcing should not be an issue as we see it currently, but we'll continue making sure that that is the case. The good news is our outreach partners that support the unhoused community have been working with them to find short-term sheltering solutions for a while now and been communicating with them since last week and making sure that folks have supports that are available, that we're understanding where their needs are, that we're understanding what folks are planning to do because they're not always waiting for us to react, right? We've heard that many of our unhoused community members have already begun to make those plans to seek indoor shelter this weekend through individual support networks, and we're really happy to hear that. But those conversations had been happening with our county partners since last week. We continue and remain dedicated to supporting all in our community and encourage everyone to share with their networks that the wind chills this weekend and early next week are going to be severe. And we encourage those to do what the National Weather Service has told us is to stay inside. We will continue to work for those that are outside, have a place and warm place to be. So we do all that we can to protect and to ensure the safety of our unhoused community. That is my update. You have seen that we have sent a press release out. We will continue to stay on this, work with our partners. We understand too that several partners in our community beyond just the city and the county are perhaps expanding their availability to take folks in. And we appreciate that as that moves forward. So Mayor, I hope that's the end of my update. I know if there are additional questions that some of our staff who've been working on the operations more directly are here, but I believe what it shows is that we continue and we have protocols in place to really make sure we're moving forward. And we are trying to be very thoughtful as we, like so many of you, like so many in our community, could not live with ourselves if we were having temperatures that severe and we weren't leaning into that as we move forward. So just appreciate that.
Well, Maria, thanks so much for that. And thanks to everyone at the City Organization and Office of Disaster Management and our nonprofit partners who are making this happen, because it is going to get viciously cold. And so glad we'll have those extra spaces for space for people to go. One question that I have is, can you address transportation, about how we're going to make sure people are able to access the East Boulder Rec Center?
Yep, we have, and we're continuing to finalize that as we move forward, but we are working with our partners to increase transportation to the shelter as we move forward. We are going to be continuing to think about ways in which we amplify that messaging to make sure that that happens. We often find, and in particular, I actually thank our partners in PD that through the night when they're doing the patrols, they are thoughtful. If they see someone in community, to make sure that they know where to go and that we can help if need be. But we are continuing to finalize the frequency of possible options for transportation, and we will link that out as we continue to learn more with our partners.
It's great to hear. Any other thoughts on this matter? Matt?
Thanks, Aaron. And thanks for the update, Nuria. Sent that hotline Monday with sort of the aspiration that we would get to this place. So I'm great that we're here, and I appreciate Aaron bringing up that transportation question. One of the questions I have sort of centers around the operational challenges that we faced when we did this similar in December 2022, and sort of how we've come from that to make sure that even though it was successful in terms of the number of people that sought out shelter at East Boulder Community Center or East Boulder Rec Center, but how are we making sure that operationally, I just want to make sure that we've got lessons learned effectively, and we're going to have a much cleaner operation. Because I think one of the concerns I have is if these are a year apart, are we really building that lesson learned, and are we getting to a place where we can have these as shelf-ready plans that we can implement, and each time we get significantly better? I just want to make sure that, because I think there's instilling that confidence in community, which is really important for us to do. And so some of that might be messaging, but also some of it is, are we actually fulfilling that and getting a lot better at those things when we are doing it in a hurry, bringing everyone together, and there's a lot of just intrinsic chaos that comes with dealing with extreme weather and the preparedness that comes with that.
Intrinsic chaos is a good term for that. So I thank you for that question, council member, and will say that after our events, we have some after action briefings amongst what went well, what didn't, what do we need to do more of, and what did we get right and what did we get wrong. And so that continues to build. Some of the lessons learned are about the right kind of staffing as we're thinking about that. We are looking at a full staffing component that includes types of security, some folks perhaps in our care program, mental health service professionals. We have some training involving for staff that are perhaps volunteering that would not necessarily be in this workspace. How do we provide that training early on? We as city also understand that this is a long weekend. It is a time where a lot of staff perhaps who are volunteering, this is not their option. So how do we continue to provide and have adequate staffing throughout the days? Because it is harder when the days are longer, and providing stipends and perhaps some comp time and days compensation, so we don't have to scramble for additional staff to make sure that we have all that we need there. We are enhancing continued partnerships with those in the county and others in community that are helping to provide mats and food, and being able to provide those additional support provisions. And so some of that we learned from last year, some of that we'll continue to learn as we move forward this year as well. But please know that after every incident like this, and certainly after every emergency that we have, we debrief and we learn from those lessons and we get better. And so really happy to think about additional ways. We hope that this will be every time we have an emergency event like this, or a critical event, we get more seamless in how we move forward. I think the testament to that is that while we monitor, we are quickly able to move forward. I believe last year we had an incident we're on the heels of the weather of last year and that kind of polar plunge, if you will, of temperatures dropping so quickly and severely in an hour period last year. And we did not have, for example, the library where a lot of our folks go to because we were dealing with meth remediation. We moved very quickly there within an 18-hour period. We are moving very quickly here. And the amount of ease and I would say coordination to me in watching those two events play out shows some learning as we move forward. And we will continue to enhance our protocols and make those better as we move forward.
Well, that, Nicole?
You, and I just wanted to echo your thanks to staff and thank you. Thanks for the overview, but not just for the work that's been done this week, but just for all the work that has gone into creating this plan in the first place, because you don't get to be able to stand up something like this in the span of a week without having a really, really solid plan. So just thank you for that and the continued work on the plan as these events happen so that it can get better every time. More than when we did this process last year during the cold spell that we had. I really have an appreciation for just how many departments are involved in getting all this together. HR, dealing with all of this extra time that folks are going to be working, Parks and Rec, the care team, HHS, communications, transportation, all of our emergency services. So just thank you to everybody who is working to make sure that our community can stay safe this weekend as these temperatures get really low. And thank you especially to all the staff that are going to be working extra time this weekend while many people are off, making sure that people stay safe. So just a lot of appreciation. Thank you so much.
Appreciate that, Mayor Pro Tem, and we'll say that I extend that if you permit me that to our partners too at the shelter and our partners at Boulder County who've been essential as we move forward. So appreciate that.
Yeah.
Ditto, Nicole. Well said. Thanks to everybody for the way you've jumped on this. And I know I've been quiet. I probably am getting something sick as we speak. But really thanks to everybody for this. And thank you, Nicole, for those really kind comments.
Well said. And I hope you feel better soon. Okay, with that, Alicia, can we go to our last matter, please?
Yes, sir. Our last matter on tonight's agenda is item number 7, matters from the mayor and members of council. 7A is the 2024 Library District Trustee Appointment Committee assignments.
Very good. Well, I guess I can start this one off here. So something that we missed a little bit in assigning, taking our council assignments is that we do need to have 2 people from council participate in the selection of the library board trustees. There's, I believe, 1 position up this year. So we need 2 council members to join 2 members of the county commission, as well as 2 ex officio representatives from the library district board of trustees. Last year, Nicole and I did this when we selected the whole set. This year, I think it's just the 1 person, so we need 2 council members to take that on. I'm happy to let somebody else do that this year, so I'm hoping 2 folks are willing to raise their hand. It's a relatively, it won't be an enormous commitment this year because we're just interviewing for 1 position, but do expect some interviews, reading some materials, and a couple of meetings to make the determination. And with that, who wants to raise their hand? Ooh, I see.
Are we getting ready to do what? I'm sorry.
So it's looking
like
for volunteers to be on the library district.
Oh God! Ah! No kidding. I mean, again, I know that. I'm sorry. I thought we were ending the meeting. I was like, wait, I don't know why. But I'm definitely interested in learning more. And if there are not 2 other people that are like, yeah, then I'm happy to step aside. But I got to serve on the steering committee for their community literacy work over the last couple of months, and just really have been impressed by the team and the efforts there, and happy to serve. And but yeah, again, I know that there are others who are also very interested, so I'm happy to be the backup.
Thanks for volunteering, Taisha. One more council member? Or does someone need to be?
So basically it's looking like I'm not going to be the backup.
All right. Tina raised her hand. Thanks so much, Tina.
Thank you, Tina.
Okay, and just want to make sure nobody else wants to compete for the spots, but looks like Tina and Taisha.
It's two
Great.
spots, Taisha. You're not an alternate.
I know. I was like, wait a minute. So is that what happened? It would be my pleasure to work with you on this very important issue. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much for volunteering. And then there'll be follow-up. Chris, Chris Meschuk, are you going to do the follow-up for this?
Yep, I'll go ahead and follow up with folks and get you some more details. So thank you so much.
Great. And then would we do a formal appointment on the consent agenda next week?
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Elisha, I think we're at the end of our agenda.
That is so true, sir. And what a wonderful first of the year meeting.
So wonderful. Any final thoughts from anyone? Seeing none, I will gavel us closed.
You know what it is? It's the brown hand. You know, I don't know what to do. It's hard to see against the background. So I'll marinate on that. My apologies, Erin. It's hard to see it. So I will work on that. Again, see, technology. Is brown and black people involved in that? Probably not. Alas, I'm happy that we have it. So, but I did want to, close as we started, which was on the National Day of Racial Healing. I'm really, really honored to have Amy Kane, who is our Equity Program Officer for the City of Boulder, participate in the National League of Cities Race, Equity, and Leadership session actually that they're going to be having on January 16th. It is a virtual from 2 to 3:30, and it's a part of their Equitable Pathways to Municipal Healing and Action, with a real focus on the 4 A's of racial healing framework, which is acknowledge, apologize, atone, and act, and how municipalities featured are incorporating the framework in their local communities. So again, just honored to know that the work that we are doing is not just here in a silo, but it really is a part of a broader national effort. And again, that we are doing our best to acknowledge, apologize, atone, and act. So thank you so much.
Thanks for that. It's a good way of coming full circle on the meeting. And seeing no other hands, I'll gavel us closed here at 9:25 p.m. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Good night.